In the golden glow of an English summer, a lavish dinner at Rosewood Hall turns deadly when vibrant heiress Sylvia Carslake collapses, poisoned by foxglove hidden in a fragrant lamb roast. Was it a tragic mistake or cold-blooded murder? Miss Jane Marple, with her quiet wisdom and sharp eye, unravels a web of secrets grief-stricken fiancé George Pritchard, botanist Dr. Henshaw's fatal oversight, and young maid Lily's innocent error. In a garden where beauty masks danger, only Marple can unearth the truth before another life is lost. The herb of death, tale of deception, devotion, and deadly herbs. Chapter 1. The invitation to Rosewood Hallin. The drowsy warmth of a late August afternoon. The village of St. Mary Mead lay bathed in the soft light of a sinking sun. Miss Jane Marple, seated in her garden amid a riot of dahlias and sweet peas, worked her knitting needles with the quiet precision of long habit. The air carried the faint hum of bees and the distant clatter of a milk cart, but her thoughts were elsewhere, stirred by the arrival of the morning post. Among the usual letters a note from her nephew Raymond, a circular from the Women's Institute lay an envelope of heavy cream paper, its crest embossed with the insignia of Rosewood Hall. Miss Marple slit it open with a silver letter knife, her eyes narrowing as she read. The letter was from Sir Henry Clithering, her old friend and one-time Commissioner of Scotland Yard, now retired to his country estate some 20 miles distant. He invited her to a weekend gathering at Rosewood, promising lively company and perhaps a puzzle or two to amuse you. The guest list intrigued her. Miss Sylvia Carslake, a young heiress known for her charm; her fiancé, Mr. George Pritchard, a man of uncertain reputation; Dr. Lloyd Henshaw, a botanist of some renown; and Mrs. Arthur Bantry, a widow whose sharp tongue was matched only by her sharper memory. Miss Marple folded the letter, her lips pursing thoughtfully. Sir Henry was no idle host. His invitations often carried an undercurrent of purpose. She recalled their last meeting, when he had teased her knack for unraveling human nature, comparing her to a gardener spotting weeds among the roses. "You see the roots, Jane, where others see only petals," he had said. The memory brought a faint smile, but also a prickle of curiosity. What, she wondered, lay beneath this particular bouquet of guests? She rose, her shawl slipping slightly, and crossed the lawn to her cottage. The interior was a study in ordered simplicity: chintz curtains, a polished mahogany table, and a shelf of well-thumbed Novelstickens, Trollope, and a dog-eared copy of Wilkie Collins. She placed the letter beside her knitting basket, her mind already sifting possibilities. Sylvia Carslake, she recalled from village gossip, had inherited a fortune from her industrialist father, and her engagement to Pritchard had raised eyebrows. Dr. Henshaw, she vaguely remembered, had lectured at the vicarage on poisonous plants, his enthusiasm bordering on obsession. As for Mrs. Bantry, her presence promised lively, if caustic, conversation. Miss Marple glanced at the clock, 4:30, and decided to consult her maid, Florence, who had a knack for gleaning tidbits from the village grapevine. Florence, bustling in with a tray of tea, needed little prompting. "That Miss Carslake," she said, setting down the teapot, "they say she's ever so pretty, but flighty. And Mr. Pritchard, well, Mrs. Harmon at the vicarage heard he's fond of cards, and not the winning kind. Dr. Henshaw," Florence added, "was a queer sort, always poking about in hedges, while Mrs. Bantry was proper old county, but with a tongue that could clip a hedge." Sipping her tea, Miss Marple filed away these scraps, each a thread in the tapestry of human folly. She accepted Sir Henry's invitation with a brief note, her spidery handwriting betraying none of her curiosity. As dusk settled over St. Mary Mead, she returned to her garden, the air now cool and scented with lavender. The weekend, she sensed, would be more than a social diversion. Human nature, like her garden, often hid its dangers beneath a pleasing surface, and Miss Marple, with her quiet eyes and sharper mind, was ready to dig. Chapter 2. A Feast of Misfortune. The dining room of Rosewood Hall gleamed under the soft glow of a chandelier, its crystal prisms scattering light across the polished mahogany table. The evening of Friday, August 24th, was warm, and the tall windows stood open to the terrace, admitting a faint breeze scented with jasmine. Sir Henry Clithering, resplendent in a black dinner jacket, presided at the head of the table, his silver hair catching the candlelight. To his right sat Miss Jane Marple, her lavender silk gown understated yet elegant, her eyes alert behind her spectacles. The other guests, Sylvia Carslake, George Pritchard, Dr. Lloyd Henshaw, and Mrs. Arthur Bantry filled the remaining chairs, their voices mingling in a hum of polite conversation. Sylvia, at 23, was the picture of youthful vitality. Her auburn hair, swept into a fashionable chignon, framed a face that combined delicacy with determination. Her emerald green dress shimmered as she leaned toward George Pritchard, her fiancés, her laughter bright as she recounted a story from a recent London soirée. George, a man of 30 with a square jaw and restless eyes, nodded absently, his fingers toying with the stem of his wine-glass. Dr. Henshaw, a wiry figure with a scholar's stoop, sat opposite, his attention divided between his plate and a murmured discourse on the medicinal properties of rosemary. Mrs. Bantry, her ample figure swathed in burgundy velvet, dominated the conversation with tales of her late husband's hunting exploits, her voice carrying a trace of houter. Miss Marple, sipping her consomme, observed the group with her usual quiet intensity. She noted Sylvia's animated gestures, the way George's gaze flickered toward the door, and the faint frown that crossed Dr. Henshaw's brow when Sylvia mentioned her love of gardening. Mrs. Bantry, for all her bluster, seemed to watch Sylvia with a cool appraisal, as if measuring the young woman against some private standard. Sir Henry, ever the genial host, steered the conversation toward local matters, the harvest festival, the restoration of the village church. Miss Marple sensed an undercurrent, a tension too subtle for the casual observer. The first course gave way to the main, a lamb roast, its surface crusted with herbs and garlic, accompanied by roasted potatoes and a medley of summer vegetables. The dish, Sir Henry announced, was the work of Mrs. Eccles, the hall's cook, whose reputation for hearty fare was unmatched. Sylvia, cutting into her portion, inhaled deeply. "What a divine flavour," she said, her voice carrying across the table. "Is that sage? It's so distinct." Mrs. Eccles, hovering near the door in her starched apron, blushed at the compliment, murmuring that the herbs were fresh from the garden. Miss Marple, taking a small bite, agreed that the seasoning was pronounced, though she found it faintly bitter, a nuance she attributed to her sensitive palate. She glanced at Sylvia, who ate with enthusiasm, her plate soon half cleared. George, by contrast, picked at his food, his thoughts elsewhere. Dr. Henshaw, pausing his lecture on botanical taxonomy, remarked that sage was a fine herb, though easily confused with others in untrained hands. Mrs. Bantry, spearing a potato, snorted. "I leave such things to cooks," she said. "Gardens are for roses, not rummaging about in dirt." The meal progressed to dessert, a blackberry tart with clotted cream, followed by coffee served in delicate porcelain cups. Sylvia, still radiant, proposed a stroll on the terrace, but George demurred. Citing a headache, Dr. Henshaw excused himself to review his notes for a lecture, while Mrs. Bantry declared her intention to retire early. Miss Marple, pleading the fatigue of travel, followed suit, though her mind was far from rest. As she ascended the grand staircase, she paused, hearing Sylvia's laughter echo from the drawing-room below, where the young woman lingered with Sir Henry over a glass of port. It was shortly after midnight when the household was roused by a scream. Miss Marple, already in her nightgown, opened her door to find Lily, the kitchen maid, pale and trembling in the corridor. "It's Miss Karslake, ma'am," the girl stammered. "She's taken ill, dreadful ill." Miss Marple, wrapping a shawl about her shoulders, followed Lily to Sylvia's room, where a grim scene awaited. Sylvia lay on her bed, her face ashen, her breathing shallow and irregular. Her emerald dress, discarded on a chair, seemed a cruel mockery of her earlier vitality. George knelt beside her, clutching her hand, his voice hoarse with panic. "Sylvia, darling, what's happened?" Sir Henry, summoned from his study, stood in the doorway, his face grim. Mrs. Bantry, her hair in curlers, hovered behind, her usual composure replaced by wide-eyed shock. Dr. Henshaw, roused from his room, pushed through the gathering, his medical bag in hand. Kneeling beside Sylvia, Dr. Henshaw checked her pulse, his fingers steady but his expression darkening. Her pupils were dilated, her skin clammy. "She's gravely ill," he said, his voice low. "Symptoms suggest poisoning, possibly digitalis, though I can't be certain without tests." He administered a stimulant, but Sylvia's condition worsened, her breaths growing fainter. Within the hour, despite his efforts, she was gone, her body still, her face frozen in a mask of pain. The room fell silent, broken only by George's choked sob. Sir Henry, his years at Scotland Yard resurfacing, took charge. "No one leaves this room until we understand what's happened," he said, his tone brooking no argument. He turned to Dr. Henshaw. "Digitalis, you say, from foxglove?" The botanist nodded, explaining that digitalis, derived from the plant, was used in heart medications, but was lethal in high doses. "It could have been in the food," he added, "though how it got there is beyond me." Miss Marple, standing quietly by the window, observed the group. George's grief seemed genuine, yet she noted the way his eyes darted toward the door, as if seeking escape. Mrs. Bantry, regaining her poise, muttered about modern girls and their fads, but her hands trembled as she clutched her shawl. Dr. Henshaw, packing his bag, appeared shaken, his earlier confidence replaced by a pallor that matched the moonlight. Lily, lingering in the shadows, wept silently, her apron twisted in her hands. Sir Henry, catching Miss Marple's eye, beckoned her aside. "Jane," he said softly, "this is no accident. I need your eyes, your mind. You see things others." "Miss," she inclined her head, her expression serene but her thoughts racing. "A tragedy like this," she said, "is rarely simple. We must look to the roots, Henry, not just the leaves." The group dispersed to their rooms, save for George, who remained with Sylvia's body until the local doctor and police could be summoned. Miss Marple, retiring to her own room, sat by the window, her knitting untouched. The lamb roast, she recalled, had been the centerpiece of the meal, consumed by all but most eagerly by Sylvia. The sage, praised for its flavour, had come from the garden, prepared by Mrs. Eccles and her niece, Lily. Foxglove, Dr. Henshaw had said, grew nearby, a plant as beautiful as it was deadly. Her mind turned to the guests. George Pritchard, Sylvia's fiancé, stood to inherit her fortune, a fact that could not be ignored, though his distress seemed heartfelt. Dr. Henshaw, with his knowledge of poisonous plants, was an obvious suspect, yet his shock at Sylvia's death appeared unfeigned. Mrs. Bantry, for all her disdain, had no clear motive, though her sharp eyes missed little. And then there was Lily, the kitchen maid, whose tears hinted at more than simple sorrow. Miss Marple, familiar with the ways of village girls, sensed a story behind those tears, story of admiration, perhaps, or envy. The clock struck 2, its chimes echoing through the silent hall. Miss Marple rose, her shawl slipping to the floor. She thought of her own garden in St. Mary Mead, where foxglove bloomed each summer, its purple spires a warning to the unwary. A mistake, she murmured, or something more. The night offered no answers, but Miss Marple, with her quiet patience, knew the truth lay hidden in the patterns of human behavior, waiting to be unraveled as she drifted toward sleep. She pictured the dining table, the lamb roast, the herb garden beyond the terrace. Sylvia's voice, bright and careless, echoed in her memory. What a divine flavor! The words, so innocent then, now carried a weight of menace. Miss Marple's needles lay idle, but her mind was at work, stitching together the threads of a tragedy that had only begun to unfold. Chapter 3. The Shadow of Foxglove. The morning after Sylvia Carslake's death dawned grey and heavy. The sky over Rosewood Hall cloaked in clouds that mirrored the sombre mood within. Miss Jane Marple, having slept fitfully, rose early, her lavender shawl draped over her shoulders as she stood by her bedroom window. The gardens below, so vibrant the previous evening, now seemed subdued, their colours muted under the overcast light. She watched a gardener pruning roses, his movements methodical, and thought of the precision required to distinguish friend from foe in a garden or in a household downstairs. The dining room scene of last night's fatal feast was empty save for a maid clearing the remnants of breakfast. Sir Henry Clithering, his face etched with the strain of a sleepless night, had convened the guests in the library, a spacious room lined with leather-bound volumes and dominated by a marble fireplace. Miss Marple entered quietly, her knitting bag in hand, and took a seat near the window, where she could observe without drawing attention. Sir Henry stood by the hearth, his hands clasped behind his back, his years as a Scotland Yard commissioner evident in his commanding presence. George Pritchard, Sylvia's fiancé, slumped in an armchair, his eyes red-rimmed. Dr. Lloyd Henshaw, the botanist, perched on the edge of a sofa, his fingers drumming nervously. Mrs. Arthur Bantry, her burgundy shawl pinned with a cameo brooch, sat erect, her lips pursed in disapproval. The air was thick with unspoken questions. Sir Henry cleared his throat. "We are faced with a tragedy," he began, his voice steady but grave. "Miss Carslake's death was no natural event. Dr. You suggested poisoning by digitalis last night. Can you elaborate?" All eyes turned to the botanist, who adjusted his spectacles, his scholarly demeanour tinged with unease. "Digitalis," Dr. Henshaw said, "is a toxin derived from the foxglove plant, Digitalis purpurea. It's used in minute doses to treat heart conditions, but in excess it causes nausea, irregular heartbeat, dilated pupils, and, ultimately, death. Miss Carslake's symptoms, her collapse, her shallow breathing, her pallor, were consistent with digitalis poisoning. I'd estimate she ingested a significant quantity, likely within hours of her death." "And the source?" Sir Henry pressed. "You mentioned the food." Henshaw hesitated, his gaze flickering toward the window. The lamb roast, served at dinner, is the most likely vehicle. It was heavily seasoned with herbs and foxglove leaves. To an untrained eye, can resemble sage or other culinary herbs. If foxglove was mistakenly or deliberately mixed into the dish, it could account for the poisoning. Mrs. Bantry snorted, her voice cutting through the room. Deliberately. Are you suggesting murder, Doctor? In Sir Henry's house? Her tone was indignant, but her eyes darted to George Pritchard, who flinched as if struck. Sir Henry raised a hand for silence. We must consider all possibilities, Mrs. Bantry. The police will arrive soon. But until then, we must gather facts. Mrs. Eccles prepared the meal. I've asked her to join us. The door opened, and Mrs. Eccles entered, her broad face flushed with anxiety. Her apron was pristine, but her hands twisted nervously in its folds. Behind her trailed Lily, the kitchen maid, a slight girl of 17 with downcast eyes and trembling lips. Miss Marple, her needles clicking softly, studied the pair. Mrs. Eccles, she noted, carried the weight of responsibility, while Lily seemed to shrink under the scrutiny, her hands clasped tightly before her. Mrs. Eccles, Sir Henry said, his tone gentle but firm. The lamb roast was the centerpiece of last night's dinner. You used herbs from the garden, I understand. Can you tell us about them? Mrs. Eccles nodded, her voice thick with emotion. I, sir. I used sage, rosemary, and a bit of thyme, all picked fresh from the herb patch by the kitchen garden. I've cooked here for years, sir, and never had a mishap. The sage was for the roast, mixed with butter to rub under the skin. I'd stake my life it was proper sage. And who gathered the herbs? Sir Henry asked. Mrs. Eccles glanced at Lily, who seemed to shrink further. That'd be Lily, sir, my niece. She's new to the kitchen, only been with us a month. But she's a good girl, eager to learn. Lily, prompted by a nudge from her aunt, spoke in a whisper. I picked the herbs, sir, like Aunt Mary told me. Sage, she said, from the patch near the lavender. I brought them to her, and she used them straight away. Dr. Henshaw interjected, his voice sharp. Sage and foxglove leaves can look alike, especially to someone inexperienced. Foxglove grows in the garden, doesn't it? Near the herb patch. Mrs. Eccles bristled. It does, but I'd know the difference, sir. I checked the leaves myself. Before chopping them, they were sage, I swear it. Miss Marple, her eyes half closed, spoke for the first time, her voice soft but clear. The garden is a busy place, Mrs. Eccles. Were you alone when you checked the leaves, or was Lily with you, or perhaps someone else? The cook hesitated, her brow furrowing. Lily was there, ma'am, and I suppose others might have passed by the gardener or one of the guests. The kitchen door's always open in fine weather. Miss Marple nodded, her needles pausing. And you, Lily, did you notice anything unusual in the garden? Anyone near the herbs, perhaps? Lily's eyes widened, and she shook her head vigorously. No, ma'am. I just picked what Aunt Mary told me. I didn't see no one. Her voice cracked, and she looked down, her fingers twisting her apron. Sir Henry dismissed the pair, instructing them to remain available. As the door closed, Mrs. Bantry leaned forward, her voice low but venomous. That girl's hiding something. You mark my words, she's not as innocent as she seems. George Pritchard, rousing himself, spoke hoarsely. You can't think Lily meant harm. She adored Sylvia, followed her about like a puppy. If anyone's to blame, it's the cook, or whoever let foxglove grow so near the kitchen. Dr. Henshaw frowned. Foxglove is common in English gardens, Mr. Pritchard. It's ornamental, not a weed to be uprooted. The fault lies in the handling, not the planting. Sir Henry turned to Miss Marple, his expression expectant. Jane, you've been quiet. What do you make of this? Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her gaze thoughtful. It's a curious thing, Henry, how a single mistake can ripple outward. Foxglove and sage, so alike, yet so different, remind me of people one may seem harmless, but carry a hidden sting. We must ask not only how the leaves came to be in the roast, but why they affected Miss Karslake so severely. She ate heartily, yes, but did others not taste the same dish? Her words hung in the air, prompting a murmur of agreement from Sir Henry. He turned to the group. Did anyone notice anything odd about the meal? The flavour, perhaps? Mrs. Bantry shrugged. It was strong, I'll grant you, but I'm no cook. I ate sparingly lambs, too rich for my digestion. Dr. Henshaw admitted to finding the seasoning bitter, but attributed it to an unfamiliar variety of sage. George, his voice flat, said he'd barely eaten, his appetite dulled by a headache. Miss Marple, recalling her own small portion, noted the bitter aftertaste, but had dismissed it as a quirk of the recipe. Sir Henry paced before the fireplace, his mind racing. The police will test the leftovers, but we must consider motive. Sylvia was young, wealthy, and engaged. Her death benefits. Someone gnaw removes an obstacle. George's head snapped up, his face flushing. If you're implying I'd hurt her, you're wrong. I loved Sylvia. Her money meant nothing to me. His voice broke, and he buried his face in his hands. Mrs. Bantry's eyes narrowed. Love's a fine word, Mr. Pritchard, but debts have a way of sharpening one's priorities. I've heard whispers of your losses at the tables. George glared at her, but before he could retort, Dr. Henshaw intervened. This is speculation, not evidence. I was in the garden yesterday, studying a rare clematis, but I didn't touch the herbs. My knowledge of foxglove makes me a convenient suspect, I suppose, but I had no reason to harm Miss Karslake. Miss Marple, her gaze drifting to the window, spoke softly. Reasons are like seeds, Dr. Henshaw. They may lie dormant until the right conditions arise. We must look to the garden itself, I think, and to those who walked its paths. Sir Henry nodded, dismissing the group with instructions to remain on the estate. As the others filed out, he drew Miss Marple aside. Jane, you see the threads. I miss what's troubling you. She smiled faintly, her eyes sharp. A great deal, Henry. The garden is a place of beauty, but also of secrets. Lily's fear, Mrs. Eccles's certainty, Dr. Henshaw's expertise. Mr. Pritchard's grief, each is a piece of the puzzle. But the key lies in the moment the leaves were chosen, and by whose hand. Returning to her room, Miss Marple sat by the window, her knitting untouched. She pictured the herb patch, its orderly rows disrupted by the wild beauty of foxglove. In St. Mary Mead, she had once seen a child mistake foxglove for a harmless plant, saved only by a neighbour's quick intervention. Here no such intervention had occurred, and Sylvia had paid the price. But was it a mistake, she wondered, or a design cloaked in innocence? The clock struck noon, its chimes mingling with the distant rumble of a police car approaching the hall. Miss Marple rose, her mind clear. The shadow of foxglove loomed large, but the truth, she knew, lay in the human heart, its passions, its errors, its hidden thorns. With her quiet step and sharper mind, she was ready to uncover it. Chapter 4. The guests under scrutiny. The library of Rosewood Hall, with its high ceilings and rows of leather-bound tomes, seemed to close in on its occupants as the morning wore on. The air was heavy with the scent of old paper and wax polish, but an undercurrent of unease sharpened every glance and word. Sir Henry Cleathering stood before the fireplace, his posture rigid, his eyes scanning the assembled guests with the keenness of a hawk. The police had arrived, an inspector and a constable, now examining Sylvia Carslake's room and the kitchen, but Sir Henry, with his old Scotland Yard instincts, had taken it upon himself to probe the human elements of the tragedy. Miss Jane Marple sat in a high-backed chair near a bookcase, her knitting needles moving with a soft, rhythmic click, her mild expression belying the intensity of her observation. The others, George Pritchard, Dr. Lloyd Henshaw, and Mrs. Arthur Bantry, occupied seats in a loose semicircle, their faces a study in varying shades of guilt, fear, and defiance. Sir Henry began, his voice measured but firm. The police will do their work, but we cannot sit idle. Miss Carslake's death was no accident, and the poison digitalis, from Foxglove Point to the dinner we all shared. Each of us was present, each of us ate the meal, yet only Sylvia succumbed. We must ask why, and who stood to gain. His gaze swept the room, lingering on George Pritchard, whose hands clenched the arms of his chair. George, his face haggard, spoke first, his voice raw. "You're looking at me, Sir Henry, and I know why. Sylvia's money, her inheritance. The talk of the village, isn't it? But I loved her. I'd have married her if she hadn't a penny. To think I'd harm her." He broke off, his eyes glistening, and turned his face away. Mrs. Bantry, seated on a velvet settee, adjusted her shawl with a deliberate gesture, her lips curling slightly. "Love is a pretty sentiment, Mr. Pritchard, but it doesn't pay the bills. I've heard things, you know, debts, card games, a certain recklessness with money. Sylvia's fortune would have been a convenient salve, wouldn't it?" Her tone was sharp, almost relishful, as if she enjoyed watching George squirm. George's head snapped up, his cheeks flushing. "That's slander, Mrs. Bantry. I won't sit here and be accused by gossiping old." He caught himself, swallowing hard, and sank back, his hands trembling. Dr. Henshaw, who had been silent, leaned forward, his thin frame taut with irritation. "This is getting us nowhere. Accusations without evidence are mere noise. I, too, could be painted a villain. My knowledge of plants makes me an easy target. But I had no quarrel with Miss Carslake. I barely knew her. My interest lies in science, not scandal." Sir Henry raised a hand, his expression stern. "No one is accusing anyone yet, but we must lay bare the facts. Mr. Pritchard, let's start with you. Sylvia's inheritance was substantial, was it not? And you were to marry soon. Did that bring you under any pressure?" George hesitated, his jaw tightening. Sylvia's father left her a fortune, stocks, property, nearly £50,000. We planned to marry in the spring, and yes, the money would have come to us, but I wasn't desperate. I have prospects, a position in a shipping firm, good enough to keep us comfortable. The debts Mrs. Bantry so kindly mentioned, he shot her a venomous glance. They're exaggerated. A few bad hands at whist, nothing more. Miss Marple, her needles pausing, spoke softly, her voice cutting through the tension like a breeze. "Money, Mr. Pritchard, has a way of casting long shadows. Even a small debt can grow in the mind of one who loves. Did Sylvia know of your whist troubles? George's eyes met hers, and for a moment he seemed disarmed by her gentle tone. She knew I'd lost a bit, yes, but she laughed it off. Said it didn't matter, that we'd have plenty. Sylvia was like that, generous, carefree. His voice cracked, and he looked away, his grief palpable. Sir Henry turned to Dr. Henshaw, his gaze narrowing. Doctor, your expertise in botany is well known. You were in the garden yesterday, you said, studying plants. Did you approach the herb patch, perhaps notice anything amiss? Henshaw's fingers twitched, and he adjusted his spectacles, a nervous habit Miss Marple noted. I was in the garden, yes, examining a rare clematis near the greenhouse. The herb patch is some distance away, but I passed it on my way. I didn't linger. Foxglove grows there, as I told you, but I had no reason to touch it. My work is with medicinal plants, not culinary ones. And yet, Sir Henry pressed, you knew at once that digitalis was the cause of Sylvia's death. That's a remarkable deduction, wouldn't you say? Henshaw bristled, his voice sharp. Not remarkable, merely professional. Her symptoms were textbook nausea, irregular pulse, dilated pupils. I've studied toxicology for years. Any doctor worth his salt would have suspected digitalis. Miss Marple tilted her head, her eyes bright with interest. And the leaves, Dr. Henshaw, foxglove and sage, so similar to the untrained eye. You've seen them side by side in the garden. Might someone, meaning no harm, confuse them? Henshaw nodded, his tones softening. It's possible, Miss Marple. The leaves are roughly the same shape, though foxglove is softer, with a slight downy texture. A novice like that kitchen girl Lily could easily make the mistake, especially in haste. Mrs. Bantry, who had been fanning herself with a lace handkerchief, interjected with a snort. A mistake, you say? I'm not so sure. That girl, Lily, was always hovering near Sylvia, mooning over her dresses and her manners. Envy, that's what I saw in her eyes. And envy, let me tell you, can turn a mistake into something darker. Sir Henry turned to her, his brow furrowing. Mrs. Bantry, you've made no secret of your dislike for Sylvia. You called her modern last night, and not kindly. Did you have any cause to wish her ill? Mrs. Bantry's eyes widened, and she drew herself up, her cameo brooch glinting in the dim light. Wish her ill? What nonsense. I found her manners grating flighty, too free with her laughter, no respect for tradition. But I'd hardly poison a girl for it. Besides, I was nowhere near the kitchen or the garden. I spent yesterday afternoon in my room, writing letters. Miss Marple, her needles resuming their rhythm, spoke again, her voice deceptively mild. Letters are a fine occupation, Mrs. Bantry, but windows look out on gardens. Did you happen to glance out, perhaps see someone near the herb patch? Mrs. Bantry hesitated, her fan stalling mid. Well, now that you mention it, I did see someone, Dr. Henshaw, I believe, poking about near the greenhouse, and later, that girl Lily, scurrying back to the kitchen with a basket. But it meant nothing to me at the time. Gardens are for servants, not ladies. Sir Henry nodded, making a mental note, then turned to Miss Marple. Jane, you've heard their accounts. What's your sense of it? Miss Marple set her knitting in her lap, her gaze drifting to the window where rain had begun to patter against the panes. It's a tangled web, Henry, but not without pattern. Mr. Pritchard's love for Sylvia is clear, but love can be a burden when money is scarce. Dr. Henshaw's knowledge is both his strength and his vulnerability to much knowledge. Sometimes invites suspicion. Mrs. Bantry sees much, but her judgments are coloured by her own standards. And then there's Lily, a young girl caught in a storm she doesn't understand. We must look to her, I think, and to the moment the herbs were gathered. Sir Henry dismissed the group, instructing them to remain on the estate. As they dispersed, Miss Marple lingered, her eyes on George Pritchard, who paused at the door, his shoulders slumped. She noted the way his hand brushed against his pocket, as if checking for something, a letter, perhaps, or a token of Sylvia's. Dr. Henshaw, meanwhile, hurried out, his steps brisk, as if eager to escape the room's oppressive air. Mrs. Bantry, gathering her shawl, cast a final, disdainful glance at George before sweeping away. Sir Henry joined Miss Marple by the window, his voice low. "You're seeing something, Jane, aren't you? Something I'm missing." She smiled faintly, her eyes sharp. "Not missing, Henry, but perhaps not yet noticing. People are like books, some pages are open, some hidden. Lily, for instance, is a page, her freed. Her fear is real, but is it fear of guilt or of something else? And Dr. Henshaw, his knowledge is a light, but lights cast shadows." They parted, Sir Henry to confer with the inspector, Miss Marple to her room, where she sat by the window, her knitting untouched. The rain fell steadily now, blurring the outlines of the garden. She thought of her own herb patch in St. Mary Mead, where sage grew alongside thyme and rosemary, each plant distinct to her practiced eye. Foxglove, though, was another matter, beautiful, dangerous, a temptress in purple. Had it been plucked by mistake, she wondered, or placed in Lily's basket by a hand more knowing? The clock struck 1, its chimes echoing through the hall. Miss Marple rose, her mind clear. The guests were under scrutiny, but the truth lay not in their words, but in their silences, the glances they avoided, the truths they skirted. With her quiet patience and sharper mind, she was ready to unravel the next thread in the tragedy of Rosewood Hall. Chapter 5. The cook's confession. The rain that had begun as a gentle patter now drummed steadily against the windows of Rosewood Hall, casting a sombre veil over the afternoon. The library, where the morning's interrogations had unfolded, was empty, its air still heavy with the weight of suspicion. Miss Jane Marple, her lavender shawl draped over her shoulders, descended the grand staircase, her steps soft but purposeful. The police inspector, a dour man named Hargreaves, was in the kitchen, examining the remnants of last night's fatal meal, while Sir Henry Clethering conferred with him. Miss Marple, however, had her own quarry, Mrs. Eccles, the cook, whose distress had been palpable during the morning's questioning. The kitchen, Miss Marple knew, was not only the heart of the house, but also the crucible of its secrets. The kitchen door stood ajar, releasing a faint aroma of bread and herbs, a stark contrast to the tragedy it had birthed. Inside, Mrs. Eccles stood at a scrubbed oak table, her broad hands kneading dough with a vigour that spoke more of agitation than culinary zeal. Lily, her niece, was nowhere to be seen, though a basket of wilted greens on the counter suggested her recent presence. Mrs. Eccles looked up as Miss Marple entered, her face flushed, her eyes red-rimmed from tears or sleeplessness. "Mum," she said, wiping her hands on her apron, "I didn't hear you come in. It's a terrible day, isn't it?" "Terrible indeed, Mrs. Eccles," Miss Marple replied, her voice gentle as she settled onto a stool by the table. "A young life lost, and in such a way. I thought we might talk, you and I, about the dinner quietly, without the weight of the others. Mrs. Eccles hesitated, her hands stilling. "I've told Sir Henry all I know, ma'am. The herbs were sage, I swear it. I'd never make such a mistake, not in 20 years of cooking." Her voice trembled, and she turned away, busying herself with a copper pot as if to hide her face. Miss Marple's needles, drawn from her bag, began their familiar rhythm, the soft click, a counterpoint to the rain. "I don't doubt your skill, Mrs. Eccles," she said. "Your reputation is well known, even in St. Mary Mead. But kitchens are busy places, and eyes can miss what hands assume. Tell me about the sage, how it came to you, how you prepared it." Mrs. Eccles set the pot down with a clatter, her shoulders sagging. "It was Lily who fetched the herbs, ma'am. As I told Sir Henry, I sent her to the garden yesterday morn. Told her to pick sage from the patch near the lavender. She brought back a good handful, green and fresh, and I looked them over myself. They were sage, I'd stake my life on it. I chopped them fine, mixed them with butter, and rubbed it under the lamb's skin. The roast was perfect. Miss Carslake herself said so." Her voice broke, and she pressed a hand to her mouth. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes keen behind her spectacles. "And Lily, did she seem herself when she returned? No hesitation, no doubt about what she'd picked?" Mrs. Eccles frowned, her brow furrowing. "She was quiet, now I think on it. Lily's a shy girl, ma'am, not one for chatter, but she seemed distracted, like kept glancing out the window toward the terrace where Miss Carslake was walking with Mr. Pritchard. I thought nothing of it. Girls her age get notions, don't they?" "Notions," Miss Marple murmured, her needles pausing. "Yes, they do. And Miss Carslake was a striking figure, wasn't she? The sort to turn heads, even a young girl's." She leaned forward slightly, her tone confiding. "Tell me, Mrs. Eccles, does Lily admire Miss Carslake? Perhaps speak of her often?" Mrs. Eccles's face softened, a flicker of pride breaking through her distress. "Oh, ma'am, Lily's taken with her, proper dazzled. Always going on about Miss Carslake's dresses, her laugh, the way she carries herself. Said she wanted to be like her one day, all glamour and grace. I told her to mind her place, but you know how girls are, dreams bigger than their station." Miss Marple's smile was faint, but her mind was racing. "Dreams can be powerful, Mrs. Eccles, and sometimes dangerous. When you checked the herbs, was anyone else about? The gardener, perhaps, or one of the guests?" Mrs. Eccles shook her head, but her eyes flickered with uncertainty. "The kitchen door was open, ma'am, as it always is in summer. The gardener, old Tom, was weeding nearby, and I saw Dr. Henshaw pass by, heading to the greenhouse. But no one came in, not that I noticed. It was just me and Lily, and then I got to cooking." The door creaked, and Lily entered, her slight frame almost lost in her oversized apron. Her face was pale, her eyes darting nervously to her aunt, then to Miss Marple. "Aunt Mary, the inspector wants the roasting pan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She hesitated, as if sensing the weight of the conversation she'd interrupted. Miss Marple turned to her, her expression kind but searching. "Lily, my dear, come sit a moment. You've had a dreadful shock, haven't you? I wonder if you might help me understand something about the herbs you picked." Lily froze, her hands twisting the hem of her apron. I told Sir Henry. Ma'am, I picked sage, like Aunt Mary said. I didn't know about no foxglove." Her voice trembled, and she looked to Mrs. Eccles, as if seeking rescue. Mrs. Eccles stepped forward, her tone sharp. "Leave the girl be, Ma'am, she's done nothing wrong, just followed my orders. She's no scholar of plants, not like that, Dr. Henshaw. Miss Marple raised a hand, her gesture calming. I'm not accusing Lily, Mrs. Eccles, but small details matter, and Lily's eyes may have seen more than she realizes. Tell me, Lily, when you were in the garden, did anyone speak to you, perhaps point out the sage or offer to help? Lily's eyes widened, and for a moment Miss Marple thought she might bolt, but the girl sank onto a stool, her shoulders hunching. No one helped, ma'am. I was alone, I swear. I saw Miss Carslake on the terrace, laughing with Mr. Pritchard, and I got a bit flustered. She was so beautiful, like a picture in a magazine. I might have picked too quick, but I thought it was sage. Mrs. Eccles's face crumpled, and she turned away, her hands gripping the table. Oh, Lily, you silly girl. Why didn't you say you weren't sure? I'd have checked proper, sent you back. Her voice rose, a mix of anger and despair, and she sank onto a bench, her head in her hands. Miss Marple watched the scene, her heart aching for the cook's anguish, but her mind sharpening. Mrs. Eccles, she said softly, you couldn't have known. And Lily, you mustn't blame yourself. But let's be clear. You brought the leaves to your aunt, and she used them. Did you notice anything odd about them, their texture, perhaps? Or their smell? Lily shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. They looked like sage to me, ma'am. Soft, a bit greyish, like Aunt Mary showed me once. I didn't smell them, I just handed them over. I'm so sorry, I didn't mean for Miss Carslake too. She broke off, sobbing, and Mrs. Eccles rose to comfort her, her own tears falling. Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, the sound a quiet anchor in the storm of emotion. There, Lily, she said. You've been brave to tell us this. One last thing, my dear. Did you see Dr. Henshaw in the garden? Or perhaps Mr. Pritchard or Mrs. Bantry? Anyone near the herbs? Lily sniffled, wiping her eyes with her apron. Dr. Henshaw was by the greenhouse, ma'am, looking at some flowers. He didn't come near me. Mr. Pritchard was with Miss Carslake, and Mrs. Bantry I didn't see her at all. Just old Tom, the gardener, but he was weeding the roses, not the herbs. Miss Marple nodded, filing away the details. Thank you, Lily. You've been very helpful. Now, why don't you help your aunt with the bread? Work is a great comfort. I find. Mrs. Eccles, regaining her composure, ushered Lily to the table, but her eyes met Miss Marple's, and a silent understanding passed between them. The cook's confession of her trust in Lily, her certainty in the herbs had laid bare a chain of events, but it raised more questions than it answered. Miss Marple rose, her shawl slipping slightly, and made her way to the door, pausing to glance at the basket of greens. Among them, she noted, were sprigs of rosemary, their sharp scent a reminder of the garden's deceptive bounty. Outside, the rain had eased to a drizzle, and Miss Marple stepped onto the terrace, her mind sifting through the morning's revelations. Mrs. Eccles's distress was genuine, her faith in her own skill unshaken until Lily's faltering account. Lily, in turn, was a study in innocence, her admiration for Sylvia a bright thread in a darker tapestry. But innocence, Miss Marple knew, could be a mask or a tool. In St. Mary Mead, she had once known a girl, much like Lily, whose devotion to a glamorous cousin had led to petty theft, driven by a longing to emulate her idol. Could Lily's distraction, her haste, have been more than a mistake? Her thoughts turned to the garden where the herb patch lay, its orderly rows now sodden and forlorn. Foxglove, Dr. Henshaw had said, grew nearby, its leaves a deadly mimic of sage. His presence in the garden, his expertise, loomed large, yet his shock at Sylvia's death seemed unfeigned. George Pritchard, too, bore scrutiny. His grief was real, but his debts, however small, cast a shadow. And Mrs. Bantry, with her sharp tongue and sharper eyes, had seen more than she admitted. Her disdain for Sylvia a possible veil for deeper resentment. Miss Marple returned to the hall, her steps slow but deliberate. In the drawing-room she found Sir Henry, his face grim as he pored over a notebook. "Jane," he said, looking up, "you've been to the kitchen, I hear. What did you find?" She settled into a chair, her knitting bag at her side. "A great deal, Henry, and yet not enough. Mrs. Eccles is no fool, but her trust in Lily was her blind spot. Lily, poor child, is frightened, and not without reason." She picked the herbs, but her mind was elsewhere, on Sylvia, whom she idolized. The question is whether her mistake was hers alone, or prompted by another. Sir Henry's eyes narrowed. Prompted. "You think someone guided her hand?" Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. "I think many hands were in the garden, Henry. Seen and unseen. Dr. Henshaw's knowledge, Mr. Pritchard's troubles, Mrs. Bantry's watchfulness, they all converge on that patch of earth. We must look closer, I think, at the moment the leaves were chosen, and who stood to gain by their choice." The clock struck 3, its chimes a solemn reminder of the hours slipping away. Miss Marple rose, her mind clear. The cook's confession had opened a door, but the truth lay beyond, in the tangled roots of human desire and error. With her quiet patience and sharper mind, she was ready to step through. Chapter 6. A walk in the garden. The drizzle that had cloaked Rosewood Hall through the morning had lifted by early afternoon, leaving the air cool and damp, with a faint mist curling over the lawns. Miss Jane Marple, her lavender shawl pinned neatly at her shoulders, stood on the terrace, her eyes tracing the garden's paths where the tragedy's roots seemed to lie. The police inspector Hargreaves was still in the kitchen, sifting through pots and scraps, while Sir Henry had retreated to his study to telephone Scotland Yard for a toxicologist. But Miss Marple, with her quiet instinct for the human heart, knew the answers were not in pans or reports, but in the earth itself, the herb patch where foxglove and sage had conspired to kill Sylvia Carslake. She descended the stone steps, her black lace-up shoes sinking slightly into the wet grass, and made her way toward the kitchen garden. The garden was a model of order, its beds framed by low boxwood hedges, its rows marked with stakes bearing Latin names. Rosemary, thyme, and parsley grew in tidy clumps, their leaves glistening with raindrops. At the far end, near a trellis, draped with late-blooming clematis, stood the herb patch in question, its sage plants flanked by the taller, more sinister foxglove, their purple bells drooping under the weight of moisture. Miss Marple paused, her knitting bag slung over her arm, and surveyed the scene with the keenness of a botanist, though her true study was human nature. Dr. Lloyd Henshaw emerged from the greenhouse, his tweed jacket damp at the shoulders, a notebook in hand. He started at the sight of Miss Marple, then offered a thin smile. "Miss Marple," he said, adjusting his spectacles, "you're braving the damp, I see. Come to inspect the scene of the crime." "Not a crime, perhaps, Dr. Henshaw," she replied, her voice mild but her eyes sharp. "A tragedy, certainly. I thought a walk might clear my mind, and the garden is so inviting. Would you join me? Your knowledge would be most illuminating." Henshaw hesitated, his fingers tightening on his notebook, but he nodded. falling into step beside her. "I've little to add to what I've told Sir Henry," he said, his tone defensive. "The foxglove is there, plain as day, and sage nearby. A mistake was made, though I'd no hand in it." Miss Marple nodded, her gaze drifting to the sage plants, their silvery leaves soft and fragrant. "A mistake, yes. So easy to make, isn't it, when leaves look so alike? In my garden in St. Mary Mead, I keep my herbs well apart from such dangers. But here, they grow so close almost as if inviting confusion." She stooped, her fingers brushing the sage, then glanced at the foxglove, its leaves broader, with a faint downy texture. "You know them well, of course. Tell me, how might one tell them apart, if one were hurried?" Henshaw cleared his throat, his scholarly instincts overriding his wariness. "Sage Salvia officinalis has a rough, slightly wrinkled surface, with a strong aromatic scent when crushed. Foxglove digitalis, purpureas, softer, almost velvety, with little scent. The shape is similar, but foxglove leaves are larger, often with a slight curve. A trained eye sees the difference at once, but a novice, like that girl, Lily, might not." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes narrowing as she studied the plants. "And digitalis, you said, is used in medicine. A precise dose, I presume, to avoid." "Misfortune, very precise," Henshaw replied, warming to his subject. "In small amounts, it strengthens the heart, regulates the pulse. But too much, say, a few leaves ground into a dish would overwhelm the system, causing nausea, arrhythmia, and death within hours." Sylvia's symptoms were textbook, as I told the inspector. Miss Marple paused by the foxglove, her head tilted. Textbook, indeed, and yet only Sylvia suffered so gravely. We all ate the roast, did we not? Though I confess, my portion was small age dulls the appetite. Her tone was light, but her gaze was piercing, and Henshaw shifted uncomfortably. "Ate sparingly myself," he said quickly. "The flavour was off-bitter, I thought, though I assumed it was the sage. Perhaps Sylvia consumed more, or her constitution was sensitive. Toxicology isn't my field, but such variations happen." Miss Marple moved slowly along the path, her eyes scanning the ground. Near the sage, she noticed a patch of soil, slightly disturbed, as if trodden or raked hastily. "Curious," she murmured, bending to examine it. "The earth here looks unsettled. Do gardeners often work so close to the herbs?" Henshaw frowned, peering at the spot. "Not that I've seen. Old Tom, the gardener, keeps the beds tidy, but he's methodical, wouldn't leave a mess like that. Perhaps Lily was careless when she picked the leaves. Perhaps Miss Marple said, straightening. Her gaze drifted to the kitchen window, where a curtain twitched, and she glimpsed Lily's pale face before it vanished. "Lily seems to haunt this garden, doesn't she? A young girl, dazzled by Miss Carslake, yet caught in such a dreadful error. You saw her yesterday, I believe, when you were studying your clematis." Henshaw's jaw tightened, and he tucked his notebook into his pocket. "I saw her, yes, from a distance. She was by the herb patch, basket in hand. I didn't speak to her, my work keeps me solitary. I was focused on a rare hybrid, a clematis vitacella. Quite remarkable." Miss Marple raised a hand, her smile disarming. "No need to explain, Dr. Henshaw. A scholar's passion is a world of its own. But gardens are shared spaces, aren't they? Others walk these paths. Mr. Pritchard, perhaps, or Mrs. Bantry. Did you notice them yesterday?" Henshaw hesitated, his eyes flickering. "Pritchard was on the terrace with Miss Carslake, I think, laughing and carrying on. Mrs. Bantry, I didn't see she keeps to the house, from what I gather. But I wasn't watching closely. Plants are my concern, not people. Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking softly as she resumed her walk, guiding Henshaw toward the greenhouse. The structure was a Victorian marvel, its glass panes fogged. With condensation, its interior a jungle of ferns and orchids. A fine place for study, she remarked, peering through the door, and so near the herb patch. One might see much from here, without being seen. Henshaw's face flushed, and he stepped back. If you're implying I was spying, Miss Marple, you're mistaken. I'm a scientist, not a sneak. I had no reason to watch Lily or anyone else. Of course not, Miss Marple said, her tone soothing. But eyes wander, don't they? In St. Mary Mead, I often notice things from my garden neighbours passing, children playing. It's human nature to see, even when we don't intend to. Henshaw said nothing, his lips pressed into a thin line. Miss Marple turned back to the herb patch, her mind sifting through his words. His expertise was undeniable, his presence in the garden confirmed, yet his defensiveness hinted at something unspoken. Had he seen more than he admitted, or was his unease merely the burden of suspicion? As they retraced their steps, Miss Marple's eyes caught another detail, a single foxglove. Leaf, wilted and bruised, lying on the path near the sage. She stooped to pick it up, her fingers careful, and held it to the light. How odd, she said, her voice thoughtful. This leaf is fresh, yet discarded, as if someone plucked it, then thought better of it. Henshaw peered at it, his brow furrowing. It's foxglove, no question. Perhaps Lily dropped it when she realized her mistake. Perhaps, Miss Marple said, tucking the leaf into her handkerchief. Or perhaps someone else was here, testing the leaves, or ensuring they were chosen. She glanced at the kitchen window again, but Lily was gone. The curtains still. They parted at the terrace, Henshaw retreating to the greenhouse, his notebook clutched like a shield. Miss Marple lingered, her gaze sweeping the garden. The disturbed soil, the discarded leaf, Lily's fleeting presence at the window. These were fragments, but fragments, she knew, could form a pattern. In St. Mary Mead, she had once solved a theft by noting a single footprint in a flower bed, its shape betraying the thief's haste. Here, the garden held its own secrets, waiting to be read. She returned to the hall, her shoes damp but her mind alight. In the drawing room, she found Sir Henry, his face weary as he closed his notebook. "Jane," he said, rising, "you've been out in the wet. What have you found?" She settled into a chair, her knitting bag at her side. "A great deal, Henry, though it's like a jigsaw with half the pieces missing. The garden is a stage, and many played their parts. Lee, Dr. Henshaw, perhaps others. The foxglove and sage grow too close, as if daring a mistake. And yet, I wonder if the mistake was as simple as it seems." Sir Henry leaned forward, his eyes keen. "You suspect more than error, don't you? A guiding hand." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her gaze distant. "I suspect many hands, Henry, some innocent, some less so. Lily's fear is real, but is it fear of her own error or of another's design? Dr. Henshaw sees much, but tells little. And that leaf discarded, yet fresh suggests a moment of decision or indecision. We must look closer, I think, at who walked this garden and why." The clock struck 4, its chimes a quiet summons. Miss Marple rose, her mind clear. The walk in the garden had revealed more than Plancet had shown her the outlines of human desire, error, and perhaps deceit. With her gentle step and sharper mind, she was ready to trace the next thread in the tragedy of Rosewood Hall. Chapter T. The fiancé's secret. The late afternoon light filtered through the tall windows of Rosewood Hall, casting long shadows across the parquet floors. The rain had ceased, leaving the air fresh but heavy with the scent of wet earth. Miss Jane Marple, her lavender shawl draped neatly over her shoulders, sat in the drawing-room, her knitting needles moving with their usual quiet rhythm. The house was subdued, the guests confined to the estate by Inspector Hargreaves's orders, their movements shadowed by the unspoken weight of Sylvia Carslake's death. Sir Henry Clithering, his face lined with the strain of responsibility, had summoned George Pritchard for a private interview in the library, and Miss Marple, invited to observe, had taken her place in a corner chair, her presence as unobtrusive as a faded tapestry. George Pritchard entered, his square jaw set, his eyes hollow from grief and sleeplessness. His dark suit, rumpled from restless hours, hung loosely on his frame, and his hands, clenched at his sides, betrayed a nervous energy. Sir Henry stood by the fireplace, his posture erect, his years as a Scotland Yard commissioner lending him an air of authority. The library, with its shelves of leather-bound volumes and the faint aroma of pipe smoke, seemed to close in around them, amplifying the tension. "Mr. Pritchard," Sir Henry began, his voice calm but probing, "we've established that Sylvia's death was caused by digitalis, likely from foxglove leaves mistaken for sage in last night's meal. You were her fiancé, the person closest to her. We need to understand more about her life and yours. Let's start with the obvious, Sylvia's inheritance. It was substantial, I gather, and due to pass to you upon your marriage, correct?" George's face flushed, and he ran a hand through his dishevelled hair. "Yes, that's true," he said, his voice hoarse. "Sylvia's father left her a fortune stocks, a London house, some land in Yorkshire. £50,000, give or take. We were to marry in the spring, and the money would have come to us. But I didn't care about it, Sir Henry. I loved her. The money was hers. Her world. I just wanted to be part of it." Sir Henry's eyes narrowed, his gaze steady. "A noble sentiment, but love and money are old companions. Mr. Pritchard, Mrs. Bantry, mentioned debts, gambling debts, to be precise. Care to enlighten us?" George stiffened, his hands clenching tighter. "Mrs. Bantry's a meddling old gossip," he snapped, then caught himself, his tone softening. "Yes, I've played cards, whist, poker, the usual. I've lost a bit, more than I should have, perhaps. £100 or so, spread over months, but it's not what people think. I wasn't drowning in debt. I have a position with a shipping firm, good prospects. Sylvia knew about the losses, and she didn't care. She said we'd sort it out together." Miss Marple, her needles pausing, spoke softly, her voice cutting through the room like a breeze. "Love is a great comforter, Mr. Pritchard, but it doesn't erase the past. Did Sylvia's generosity extend to settling these debts, or were there expectations placed on you?" George turned to her, his expression a mix of defiance and weariness. "She offered to help, yes. Said she'd pay off what I owed after we were married. But I didn't ask for it, Miss Marple. I wanted to prove I could stand on my own, be worthy of her. She was God, she was everything." His voice broke, and he buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Sir Henry exchanged a glance with Miss Marple, his brow furrowing. Let's move to another matter, he said. Sylvia's will. As her fiancée, you'd know its terms. Had she made any recent changes? George lifted his head, his eyes wary. She did, about a month ago. She named me her sole beneficiary. Her lawyer drew it up in London. She said it was practical, with the wedding so near. If anything happened to her, she wanted me taken care of. But I never thought, never imagined. He stopped. His voice choked and looked away, his gaze fixed on the rain-streaked window. Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, the soft click, a counterpoint to the silence. A generous gesture, she said, and a heavy responsibility. Such a will might draw attention, Mr. Pritchard, especially if others knew of it. Did you discuss it with anyone? Friends, perhaps, or family? George shook his head, his jaw tightening. No one. It was private, between us. Sylvia's aunt in Devon knew. I think she's her only living relative, but we didn't spread it about. People talk enough, as it is. Sir Henry paced before the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back. Let's turn to yesterday. You were with Sylvia much of the day, I understand. On the terrace, in the garden. Did you go near the herb patch, or see anyone else there? Lily, Dr. Henshaw, the gardener? George frowned, his brow creasing as he recalled the day. We were on the terrace most of the morning, Sylvia and I. She was in high spirits, laughing, planning our honeymoon. We walked the grounds later, but not near the kitchen garden. It's too close to the house, not romantic. I saw Dr. Henshaw by the greenhouse, scribbling in his notebook, and Lily was about, carrying a basket. I didn't think much of it. She's always scurrying somewhere. Old Tom, the gardener, was trimming hedges, but nowhere near the herbs. Miss Marple tilted her head, her eyes bright with interest. And Sylvia, did she mention the garden or the meal? She was so taken with the roast's flavour last night. Did she speak of herbs or show any interest in them? George's face softened, a flicker of memory softening his grief. She loved gardens, Sylvia did. Not the practical sort, but the beauty of them roses, lilies, that kind of thing. She wouldn't know sage from foxglove, though, at dinner. She said the roast was divine, asked Mrs. Eccles if it was sage. That was all. She wasn't one for cooking, too busy living. His voice faltered, and he looked down, his hands twisting together. Sir Henry stopped pacing, his gaze sharp. One more thing, Mr. Pritchard. Your headache last night. You ate little of the roast, you said. Was that the only reason, or did something trouble you about the meal? George's eyes flickered, a shadow crossing his face. Just the headache, Sir Henry. I'd been out in the sun too long, felt off. The roast smelled fine, but I wasn't hungry. If I'd eaten more, maybe I'd have noticed something saved her. His voice broke again, and he buried his face in his hands, his grief raw and unguarded. Miss Marple watched him closely, her needles still. His sorrow seemed genuine, but she noted the way his fingers brushed his pocket, as if checking for something, a habit she'd seen before, in St. Mary Mead, when a young man carried a letter he dared not share. Grief is a heavy burden, Mr. Pritchard, she said gently, but truth lightens it, in time. If there's anything you've held back, it's best to share it now. George looked up, his eyes meeting hers, and for a moment she thought he might speak, but he shook his head, his jaw set. There's nothing, Miss Marple. I've told you everything. I loved Sylvia, and now she's gone. That's all there is. Sir Henry dismissed him, his expression unreadable, and George left the library, his steps heavy. Miss Marple remained, her knitting bag at her side, her mind sifting through the interview's revelations. Sir Henry turned to her, his voice low. "Well, Jane, he's hiding something, isn't he?" She nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "Oh, yes, Henry. Not a lie, perhaps, but a secret. His grief is real, but so is his fear of what I'm not yet sure. The will, the debts, his presence. Near the garden they weave a net, but not a tight one. He's a young man in love, but love can blind as much as it binds." Sir Henry sank into a chair, rubbing his temples. "The will's the key, isn't it? £50,000 is motive enough for murder, though he seems broken by her death. And his debt small or not add pressure. But how would he get foxglove into the roast? He's no botanist." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her eyes drifting to the window where the garden lay in shadow. "He wouldn't need to be, Henry. The garden is open to all, and foxglove is no secret, grows bold as brass. But I wonder about his movements and his silences. That gesture to his pocket, something's there, a letter or a note, perhaps. And his glances toward the kitchen last night during dinner. They weren't casual." Sir Henry leaned forward, his interest piqued. "You think he suspected something, or knew more than he let on?" "I think," Miss Marple said, "that he's a man caught in a storm, and not all of it is grief. In St. Mary Mead, I knew a boy much like him, charming, impulsive, but with a secret that nearly ruined him. He carried a locket, a gift from a girl he couldn't marry, and his hand was always on it, as if to remind himself of his burden. Mr. Pritchard's secret may be simpler, but it's no less heavy." Sir Henry rose, his expression grim. "We'll need to watch him, Jane, and the others, Henshaw with his plants, Mrs. Bantry with her sharp tongue, Lily with her tears. The kitchen's the heart of this, but the motive lies elsewhere." Miss Marple gathered her knitting, her mind clear. "The motive, Henry, is like a seed. It lies hidden until it sprouts. We must look to the garden and to the hands that tended it. Mr. Pritchard's secret is one thread. But there are others, Lily's fear, Dr. Henshaw's knowledge, Mrs. Bantry's watchfulness. They all meet at the herb patch, I think." Clock struck 5, its chimes echoing through the silent hall. Miss Marple rose, her steps light but purposeful. The fiance's secret had opened a new path, but the truth lay deeper in the tangled roots of love, loss, and human error. With her gentle patience and sharper mind, she was ready to follow it. Chapter 8. The Widow's Tale. The evening shadows lengthened across Rosewood Hall, their edges softened by the golden glow of lamps lit against the encroaching dusk. The rain had left the air cool, and a faint mist clung to the gardens, lending an air of mystery to the estate. Miss Jane Marple, her lavender shawl draped over her shoulders, sat in the drawing-room, her knitting needles moving with their familiar, soothing rhythm. The house was quiet, the guests subdued by the weight of Sylvia Carslake's death and the ongoing police investigation. Inspector Hargreaves had retreated to the village to compile his notes, leaving Sir Henry Clithering to maintain order among the household. Miss Marple, however, had her own mission, to unravel the threads of suspicion that tangled around Mrs. Arthur Bantry, the sharp-tongued widow whose observations, however caustic, might hold a key to the tragedy. Mrs. Bantry, resplendent in a burgundy gown pinned with her customary cameo brooch, had agreed to a private conversation in the morning-room, a cosy space adorned with chintz, curtains, and a rosewood writing desk. Sir Henry, his face etched with fatigue, joined them, his notebook open on his lap. Miss Marple settled into a cushioned chair, her knitting bag at her side, her mild expression masking the keenness of her mind. Mrs. Bantry, seated opposite, fanned herself with a lace handkerchief, her posture erect, her eyes glinting with a mix of defiance and curiosity. Mrs. Bantry, Sir Henry began, his tone measured. You've been forthright in your opinions about Sylvia Carslake and her circle. Your candor is valuable, but we need specifics. You've hinted at motives, Mr. Pritchard's debts, Lily's envy. Let's start with your own perspective. You disapproved of Sylvia, didn't you? Mrs. Bantry's fan paused mid-wave, and she drew herself up, her lips pursing. Disapproved. That's a strong word, Sir Henry. I found her, modern, shall we say? Flighty, too free with her laughter, no sense of decorum. Girls today think charm excuses everything. But I had no personal quarrel with her. My days of feuding are long past. Her tone was brisk, but her eyes flickered, as if weighing her words. Miss Marple, her needles clicking softly, spoke in her gentle, disarming way. Modern ways can be unsettling, Mrs. Bantry, especially to those of us who value tradition. I've seen it in St. Mary meet young girls with their bold ideas, stirring up the village. But disapproval can run deep, can't it? Did Sylvia's manner ever provoke you, perhaps, beyond mere irritation? Mrs. Bantry's fan resumed its motion, a touch faster now. Provoked? Not at all, Miss Marple. She was a guest, like the rest of us. I kept my distance, that's all. I'm not one for gushing over youth and beauty, as some are. Her glance started toward the door, as if expecting an interruption, and Miss Marple noted the slight tremor in her hand. Sir Henry leaned forward, his pen poised. Let's turn to yesterday, Mrs. Bantry. You said you spent the afternoon in your room, writing letters, but you mentioned seeing Dr. Henshaw and Lily near the garden. From your window, I presume. What exactly did you see? Mrs. Bantry's eyes narrowed, and she folded her fan with a snap. My room overlooks the garden, yes. I was at my desk, but I glanced out now and then, hardly spying, mind you. Around mid-morning, I saw Dr. Henshaw by the greenhouse, poking at some vine or other, muttering to himself. Typical of him, always lost in his plants. Later, perhaps an hour before luncheon, I saw that girl, Lily, scurrying about the herb patch with her basket. She looked flustered, kept glancing toward the terrace where Sylvia and Mr. Pritchard were strolling. That's all I saw, nothing sinister, just the usual comings and goings. Miss Marple tilted her head, her eyes bright with interest. Flustered, you say? That's a keen observation, Mrs. Bantry. Young girls often wear their hearts on their sleeves, don't they? In St. Mary Mead, I knew a maid who blushed every time the vicar's son passed by. Lily's admiration for Sylvia must have been quite a burden, especially if she felt overshadowed. Mrs. Bantry snorted, her composure returning. Admiration, envy, more like Lily, followed Sylvia about like a shadow, hanging on her every word, mimicking her gestures. I saw it at dinner the night before last. She nearly dropped a tray staring at Sylvia's dress. Girls like that, they want what they can't have, and it festers. Mark my words, that girl's at the heart of this. Sir Henry made a note, his brow furrowing. A serious charge, Mrs. Bantry, but let's explore another angle. You've suggested Mr. Pritchard had motive his debts, Sylvia's will. Did you ever overhear anything between them? Perhaps a disagreement, or a hint of strain? Mrs. Bantry's lips curled slightly, as if relishing the question. They were all sweetness on the surface, Sir Henry hand-holding, whispered endearments. but I'm not deaf. Yesterday morning, on the terrace, I heard raised voices, not a full quarrel, mind you, but sharp. Sylvia was saying something about promises and trust, and George looked like a schoolboy caught stealing apples. He hushed her quick enough, but it stuck with me. Lovers' tiffs are one thing, but with her money in the mix, who knows? Ms. Marple's needles paused, and she leaned forward slightly, her voice soft but probing. Promises and trusts, such fragile things, Mrs. Bantry. Did you catch anything more, perhaps a word or two that lingered? Or see them later, in the garden, near the herbs? Mrs. Bantry shook her head, her cameo brooch glinting in the lamplight. Not a word more, Miss Marple. They were back to billing and cooing by luncheon. As for the garden, I didn't see them near the herbs only. Dr. Henshaw and Lily, as I said. My window doesn't give a full view, and I wasn't glued to it. I had letters to write, family matters, you understand. Sir Henry tapped his pen against his notebook, his expression thoughtful. Let's try a different tack. You've lived in the county a long time, Mrs. Bantry. You know how gossip travels. Had you heard anything about Sylvia before this weekend, her plans, her enemies, anything that might shed light on why she was targeted? Mrs. Bantry's fan resumed its slow wave, and she leaned back, her eyes glinting with the pleasure of sharing a tale. Sylvia was the talk of the county, Sir Henry, ever since her father died and left her that fortune, £50,000. Draws vultures, doesn't it? There were whispers of suitors before Pritchard fortune hunters, most of them, though she was too clever to be caught. Her aunt in Devon, a sour old thing, didn't approve of her gallivanting, but Sylvia paid her no mind. As for enemies, I heard nothing specific, just the usual envy from girls less favoured, and men she'd turned down. But nothing to suggest poison, not until now. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her mind sifting through the widow's words. Envy is a potent force, Mrs. Bantry, as you've said. But let me ask, did you ever share a story, perhaps, of your own experience with poison, a cautionary tale to warn or to inform? Mrs. Bantry's fan stilled, and her eyes widened, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. Why, Miss Marple, you're a sharp one. Yes, I did mention something at tea yesterday to Sylvia and Mrs. Eccles. A story from my youth about a cousin of mine, poor Clara. She died 40 years ago, after taking a mislabeled tincture from her mother's medicine chest. Nightshade it was, mistaken for a tonic. I told it to make a point. Carelessness kills, especially with plants. Sylvia laughed, said she'd stick to roses. Mrs. Eccles looked horrified, but Lily was there, listening like a mouse. I thought nothing of it, just an old woman's tale. Sir Henry's pen scratched rapidly, his interest piqued. A striking coincidence, Mrs. Bantry. Did you mention foxglove in your story, or digitalis? No, Mrs. Bantry said quickly. Nightshade, I said. Belladonna, the doctors called it. I'm no botanist. Sir Henry, I wouldn't know foxglove from fennel. But the story was meant to caution, not inspire. If Lily took it to heart, that's her doing, not mine. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes half closed, her mind racing. Stories have a way of lingering, Mrs. Bantry, especially in young minds. In St. Mary Mead, I once heard a tale of a lost ring that sent a girl searching the wrong garden, all because she misunderstood the teller. Lily's a dreamer, isn't she? Your story might have stirred her, though not as you intended. Mrs. Bantry's lips pursed, and she folded her fan with a decisive snap. If that girl twisted my words into poison, it's no fault of mine. I spoke plainly, as I always do. But I'll say this: Sylvia's death feels too neat, too convenient. Pritchard's debts, Lily's envy, even Dr. Henshaw's plant sits like a puzzle with too many pieces. Sir Henry closed his notebook, his expression grim. Thank you, Mrs. Bantry. You've given us much to consider. We may need to speak again, so please remain available. Mrs. Bantry rose, her burgundy gown rustling, and swept from the room, her head high but her steps a touch unsteady. Miss Marple remained, her knitting bag at her side, her mind sifting through the widow's tale. Sir Henry turned to her, his voice low. Well, Jane, she's a force, isn't she? But is she hiding something, or just stirring the pot? Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, her gaze thoughtful. Oh, she's stirring, Henry, but with purpose. Her story about Clara was no idle chatter, was a warning, though to whom, I'm not sure. Her dislike for Sylvia runs deeper. Then she admits, not from malice, perhaps, but from a clash of worlds. And her eyes, they see more than her tongue lets on. That glimpse of Lily, flustered by the herbs, and George's sharp words on the terrace, they're pieces of a pattern, but not the whole. Sir Henry leaned back, rubbing his temples. Her story about Nightshade, it's a curious parallel, isn't it? Could it have planted a seed in Lily's mind, or someone else's? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. Seeds, Henry, are sown in many ways. In St. Mary Mead, a word about a neighbour's debt once sparked a feud. That lasted years, all because it fell on eager ears. Mrs. Bantry's tale may have stirred Lily, or it may have given another an idea to use the garden's dangers, to cloak intent in error. We must look to the listeners, I think, and to what they heard. The clock struck 7, its chimes echoing through the silent hall. Miss Marple rose, her steps light but purposeful. The widow's tale had opened a new window, revealing not only the past, but the power of words to shape the present. With her gentle patience and sharper mind, she was ready to trace the next thread in the tragedy of Rosewood Hall. Chapter 9. Lily's burden. The morning of Sunday, August 26th, broke with a tentative sun, its rays piercing the mist that lingered over Rosewood Hall's gardens. The house, steeped in the aftermath of Sylvia Carslake's death, hummed with a subdued tension, as if the very walls held their breath. Miss Jane Marple, her lavender shawl pinned neatly at her shoulders, had risen early, her mind restless with the threads of suspicion woven through the past 2 days. Inspector Hargreaves was in the village, awaiting the toxicologist's report, while Sir Henry Clithering, ever the vigilant host, coordinated with the staff to keep the guests contained. But Miss Marple, with her quiet instinct for the human heart, sought the one figure whose trembling hands and tearful eyes hinted at a truth yet unspoken. Lily. The kitchen maid. The scullery, tucked behind the main kitchen, was a dim, low-ceilinged room where the clatter of pots was softened by the rhythmic scrub of brushes. Lily stood at a sink, her slight frame bent over a pile of silver cutlery, her apron damp from splashes. The air smelled of soap and metal, a stark contrast to the fragrant herb patch that had sparked such tragedy. Miss Marple entered quietly, her black lace-up shoes silent on the stone floor, her knitting bag slung over her arm. Lily started at the sound of her approach, a fork slipping from her hand to clatter into the basin. "Oh, ma'am," Lily gasped, her pale cheeks flushing. "I didn't see you there. I'm just finishing the silver, like Aunt Mary said." Her voice was barely above a whisper, and her eyes, red-rimmed from crying, darted to the door as if expecting rebuke. Miss Marple smiled, her expression as gentle as a summer breeze, and settled onto a wooden stool by the sink. "No need to be startled, Lily," she said, drawing her needles from her bag. "I thought we might have a little chat, you and I, away from the bustle. Polishing silver is soothing work, isn't it? It gives the mind a chance to wander." Lily nodded, her hands resuming their task, though her fingers trembled. "Yes, ma'am, it's better than thinking, sometimes." Her voice quavered, and she kept her eyes on the fork she was scrubbing, as if it held the answers she feared to voice. Miss Marple's needles began their soft, rhythmic click, a sound that seemed to ease the tension in the air. "Thinking can be a burden, my dear, especially when the heart is heavy. You've had a dreadful shock, haven't you? Miss Carslake's death, and all this talk of herbs and poisonits. No wonder you're shaken. I wonder if you might tell me a bit more about that morning in the garden when you picked the sage." Lily's hands stilled, and she bit her lip, her eyes flicking to Miss Marple, then back to the sink. "I told you, ma'am, and Sir Henry, too. I picked sage, like Aunt Mary said, from the patch near the lavender. I thought it was right. Swear I did. I didn't know about foxglove, not till Dr. Henshaw said." Her voice cracked, and a tear slipped down her cheek, glistening in the dim light dot. Miss Marple nodded, her gaze kind but searching. "I believe you meant no harm, Lily, but gardens are tricky places, aren't they? In St. Mary Mead, I once saw a girl pick nettles, thinking they were mint. Such a sting she got. You were distracted that morning, your aunt said, by Miss Carslake. Perhaps she was a dazzling figure, wasn't she?" Lily's cheeks flushed deeper, and she scrubbed the fork with renewed vigor, as if to erase her thoughts. "She was like a princess, ma'am. Her dresses, her laugh, the way she moved, it was like she belonged in a story. I saw her on the terrace with Mr. Pritchard, all bright and happy, and I couldn't stop watching. I didn't mean to rush, but I wanted to get back to the kitchen quick, to please Aunt Mary." Miss Marple's needles paused, and she leaned forward slightly, her voice soft but probing. "And in your rush, my dear, did you look closely at the leaves? Or did someone, perhaps Dr. Henshaw, or even Mr. Pritchard, point you to them, to help you along?" Lily's eyes widened, and she shook her head vigorously, the fork slipping again. "No, ma'am, no one helped. Dr. Henshaw was by the greenhouse, far off, and Mr. Pritchard was with Miss Carslake. I was alone, I swear. I just grabbed what I thought was sage-soft leaves, greyish, like Aunt Mary showed me once. I didn't know they were wrong till it was too late." Her voice broke, and she buried her face in her apron. Her sobs, muffled but raw. Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her heart aching for the girl's distress, but her mind sharpening. There, Lily," she said, rising to place a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You've been brave to tell me this. Mistakes happen, especially when the heart is full. But let's think back when you brought the leaves to your aunt. Did you notice anything odd? A different smell, perhaps, or a texture that surprised you?" Lily lifted her face, her eyes swollen but earnest. "They felt soft, ma'am, softer than I expected, but I thought that was how sage was. They didn't smell much, not like rosemary, all sharp and strong. I handed them to Aunt Mary, and she didn't say nothing, so I thought it was fine. Oh, if I'd known, I'd have thrown them out." Her sobs returned, and she clutched the edge of the sink, her knuckles white. Miss Marple patted her shoulder, her touch as soothing as her voice. "You couldn't have known, my dear. But let's consider the garden itself. You said Dr. Henshaw was nearby, and Mr. Pritchard was on the terrace. Did you see anyone else, Mrs. Bantry, perhaps, or old Tom, the gardener, or did you hear anything, a word, a laugh that stayed with you? Lily sniffled, wiping her eyes with her apron. Old Tom was weeding the roses, ma'am, but he was far off, by the fountain. Mrs. Bantry, I didn't see. She's always in the house, isn't she? I heard Miss Carslake laughing, and Mr. Pritchard saying something about London, but it was all distant, like a dream. I was in a hurry, that's all, wanting to do right by Aunt Mary. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes drifting to the window, where the garden lay bathed in soft light. A hurry can cloud the mind, Lily, but it also sharpens the senses, sometimes. Tell me, when you picked the leaves, did you go straight to the sage, or did you pause, perhaps look at the foxglove? It's a striking plant, with its purple bells. Lily's face paled, and her hands trembled anew. I did look at the foxglove, ma'am. It was so tall, so pretty, right next to the sage. I thought maybe it was part of the herb patch, but I didn't touch it, I swear. I picked from the low plants, the ones I thought were right, but they were so close together, I might have mixed them up. Her voice dropped to a whisper, and she looked down, her shoulders hunching as if bracing for blame. Miss Marple's gaze softened, but her mind was racing. The garden is a tempting place, isn't it? All those plants, so near, so alike. In St. Mary Mead, I once saw a boy pluck a berry thinking it was a currant, only to spit it out when it burned his tongue. You were alone, you say, but gardens are rarely private. Did you feel watched, perhaps, or sense someone nearby? Lily's eyes flicked to the door, and her voice dropped lower still. I don't know, ma'am. I was all flustered with Miss Carslake so close, and I wanted to be quick. But maybe I felt something, like eyes on me. I thought it was just my nerves, being new and all. I didn't see no one, honest. Her words tumbled out, and she clutched the fork, her knuckles whitening again. Miss Marple returned to her stool, her needles resuming their rhythm. Nerves can play tricks, Lily, but they also tell truths. You're a good girl, I can see that, and your aunt is proud of you, but burdens are heavy when carried alone. If there's anything more, anything you've remembered, however small, it's best to share it now. Lily's lips parted, and for a moment Miss Marple thought she might speak. But the girl shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. There's nothing, ma'am. I just made a mistake, and now Miss Carslake's gone. I'll never forgive myself, never. Her voice broke, and she turned back to the sink, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Miss Marple watched her, her heart heavy but her mind clear. Lily's burden was real, but whether it was guilt, fear, or something deeper, she could not yet say. She rose, her shawl slipping slightly, and moved to the door, pausing to glance at the scullery small window. Beyond it, the herb patch lay, its sage and foxglove intertwined like a riddle. In St. Mary Mead, she had once coaxed a confession from a shy grocer's boy by asking about his mother's roses, a question that unlocked his secret. Lily, she sensed, was close to breaking, but the key was still missing. She found Sir Henry in the drawing room, his face grim as he pored over a telegram from the toxicologist. Jane, he said, looking up, you've been with Lily, I hear. What did you find? Miss Marple settled into a chair, her knitting bag at her side. A great deal, Henry, and yet not enough. Lily is a child caught in a storm, her heart full of admiration for Sylvia and her hands full of regret. She admits to a mistake, to rushing in the garden, but her fear runs deeper than guilt. She felt watched, though she saw no one, and the foxglove drew her eye, as if tempting her hand. But whether she acted alone or was guided, I cannot yet say. Sir Henry's eyes narrowed, his interest piqued. Guided? You think someone influenced her, perhaps pointed her to the foxglove? Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her gaze thoughtful. I think many eyes were on that garden, Henry, and many hands could have stirred the pot. Lily's distraction was her own, but distractions can be sown. Dr. Henshaw's presence, Mr. Pritchard's proximity, Mrs. Bantry's tale of poison day, all circled the herb patch, like moths around a flame. We must look closer, I think, at what Lily saw and what she felt. The clock struck 11, its chimes a quiet summons. Miss Marple rose, her steps light but purposeful. Lily's burden had revealed a heart in turmoil, but the truth lay deeper, in the shadows of intent and error. With her gentle patience and sharper mind, she was ready to seek the next piece of the puzzle in the tragedy of Rosewood Hall. Chapter 10. The trap is set. The evening of Sunday, August 26th, settled over Rosewood Hall with a quiet that felt more like anticipation than calm. The mist that had veiled the gardens earlier had lifted, leaving the air crisp and the stars faintly visible through the drawing-room's tall windows. Miss Jane Marple, her lavender shawl draped neatly over her shoulders, sat in a high-backed chair, her knitting needles moving with their familiar, soothing rhythm. The house was hushed, the guests confined to their rooms or the common areas. Under Inspector Hargreaves's watchful eye, the toxicologist's report, delivered that afternoon, had confirmed digitalis in Sylvia Carslake's system, with traces found in the remnants of the lamb roast. The herb patch, with its deceptive tangle of sage and foxglove, remained the focal point of the tragedy, but Miss Marple, with her keen sense of human nature, knew the truth lay not in leaves alone but in the hands that had plucked them. Sir Henry, clithering his silver hair catching the lamplight, paced before the fireplace, his face etched with the strain of a case that defied easy resolution. The guests, George Pritchard, Dr. Lloyd Henshaw, Mrs. Arthur Bantry, and the kitchen staff had been questioned repeatedly, their stories dissected, yet the line between mistake and malice remained blurred. Miss Marple, observing the subtle currents of fear and deflection, had proposed a plan to Sir Henry, a test, not of evidence but of behaviour, to shake loose the truth hidden in the household silences. Now, as the clock neared 8, the stage was set. Jane, Sir Henry said, pausing his pacing to face her, this idea of yours, it's bold, I'll grant you, but risky. Recreating the moment of the herb selection, with Lily under scrutiny, could unsettle someone enough to slip. But what if it hardens their guard instead? Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her eyes bright behind her spectacles. People, Henry, are like skeins of wool-pull, the right thread, and the knot unravels. Lily is the key, not because she's guilty, but because she's the pivot around which others moved. Her fear is real, but so is her honesty. If we watch closely, we may see who flinches and why. Sir Henry nodded, his expression grim but resolute. He had summoned the guests to the dining room, where Mrs. Eccles, under Miss Marple's careful instruction, would prepare a sage infusion, a simple tea, harmless but symbolic, with Lily tasked to gather the leaves under supervision. The guests, unaware of the test's true purpose, were told it was a routine check of the kitchen's procedures. Inspector Hargreaves, sceptical but intrigued, had agreed to observe. His notebook at the ready. The dining room, Its mahogany table, cleared of all but a silver tray and a porcelain teapot, was lit by a single chandelier, its crystals casting soft prisms across the walls. The guests filed in, their faces a study in unease. George Pritchard, his eyes hollow, stood near the window, his hands thrust into his pockets. Dr. Henshaw, his tweed jacket slightly askew, hovered by the sideboard, his fingers twitching as if longing for his notebook. Mrs. Bantry, her burgundy shawl pinned with her cameo brooch, sat erect, her fan moving slowly, her eyes darting from face to face. Mrs. Eccles and Lily entered last, the cook's broad face flushed with nerves, Lily's slight frame trembling as she clutched a wicker basket. Sir Henry took his place at the head of the table, his voice steady but commanding. "Thank you for joining us," he said. "The police need to confirm the process by which the herbs were selected for Friday's meal. Mrs. Eccles, with Lily's assistance, will prepare a sage infusion using leaves picked fresh from the garden. You're here to observe, nothing more. Any questions?" Mrs. Bantry's fan paused, and she raised an eyebrow. "Really, Sir Henry, is this necessary? We've all said our piece. Dragging the poor girl through it again seems cruel." Her tone was sharp, but her eyes flicked to Lily, a glint of curiosity beneath her disapproval. Dr. Henshaw cleared his throat, his voice clipped. "I agree, it's redundant. The toxicologist's report was clear digitalis in the roast from foxglove. Lily's mistake is obvious. Why put her through this charade?" George Pritchard, rousing himself, spoke hoarsely. "Let them do it. If it clears things up, fine. But Lily didn't mean harm. She adored Sylvia. This is a waste of time." His voice carried a note of desperation, and Miss Marple noted the way his hand brushed his pocket, a gesture she'd seen before. Miss Marple, seated near the door, spoke softly, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "Time, Mr. Pritchard, is never wasted when truth is the goal. Lily's task is simple, and will all benefit from clarity. Shall we begin, Mrs. Eccles?" The cook nodded, her hands twisting her apron. "Aye, ma'am. I'll show Lily what to do, same as always." She turned to her niece, her tone firm but kind. "Go to the herb patch, Lily, and pick sage and lee sage, mind, the low plants, near the lavender. Bring them back quick, and I'll check them." Lily, her face pale, nodded and took the basket, her steps hesitant as she moved toward the kitchen door, which led to the garden. Sir Henry signalled for the group to follow, and they filed out onto the terrace, the evening air cool against their skin. The herb patch, bathed in the soft glow of a lantern hung from a trellis, was a neat rectangle of green, its sage plants flanked by the taller, more ominous foxglove. Lily approached, her basket trembling in her hands, her eyes darting to the group behind her. Miss Marple, standing slightly apart, watched closely, her needles stilled in her lap. Lily knelt by the sage, her fingers hovering over the leaves, her breath shallow. The girl's hesitation was palpable, her gaze flickering to the foxglove, as if its purple bells held a lingering spell. Mrs. Eccles, at her side, murmured encouragement, pointing to the sage. "There, Lily, the rough ones, like I showed you. Don't dawdle now." Lily plucked a handful of leaves, her movements deliberate, and held them up for her aunt's inspection. Mrs. Eccles nodded, her face relaxing. "That's sage, right. Enough, good girl." She took the basket and returned to the kitchen, the group trailing behind. Miss Marple, however, lingered, her eyes on Lily, who remained by the patch. Her hands clasped tightly, her gaze fixed on the ground. In the kitchen, Mrs. Eccles set the leaves on a cutting board, chopping them with a practiced hand before steeping them in hot water. The scent of sage filled the air, sharp and clean, a stark contrast to the bitter memory of Friday's roast. The guests, gathered around the table, watched in silence, their expressions a mix of boredom and unease. George Pritchard's eyes were on Lily, his jaw tight. Dr. Henshaw, his arms crossed, seemed to study the leaves with clinical detachment. Mrs. Bantry's fan moved faster, her lips pursed as if suppressing a comment. Miss Marple, rejoining the group, spoke softly to Sir Henry, her voice low. "Observe their faces, Henry. The test is not the tea, but the tension. Someone knows more than they've said, and Lily's task has stirred them." As Mrs. Eccles poured the infusion into cups, Miss Marple stepped forward, her presence commanding, despite her gentle demeanour. "A moment, please," she said, her eyes sweeping the room. "This exercise has shown us something important. Lily, you chose the sage correctly tonight, with your aunt's guidance. But on Friday you were alone, distracted, and the leaves you picked brought death. I believe your mistake was no accident, but neither was it malice. Someone, perhaps unwittingly, set you on that path." A murmur rippled through the group, and Lily's eyes widened, her hands clutching her apron. George Pritchard took a step forward, his voice sharp. "What are you saying, Miss Marple? Lily's no killer. She's just a girl. You can't pin this on her." Dr. Henshaw's face flushed, and he uncrossed his arms, his tone indignant. "This is absurd. I told you, foxglove and sage are easily confused by a novice. Lily's error was tragic, but to suggest someone orchestrated it wears the evidence." Mrs. Bantry's fan snapped shut, her voice cutting. "Evidence. Look at the girl's face, she's terrified. If she was guided, as you say, who was it? Not me, I assure you. Was in my room, far from that wretched garden." Miss Marple raised a hand, her expression serene but her eyes piercing. "Evidence, Dr. Henshaw, is often in the small things, the glance, the hesitation, the unspoken word. Lily, you felt watched in the garden, didn't you? And the foxglove, so close to the sage, drew your eye. I think someone pointed you to it, not with malice, but with carelessness, a word, a gesture, enough to tip the balance." Lily's lips parted, and her voice trembled. I don't know, ma'am. I was so flustered, with Miss Carslake so near, and I thought I heard someone say sage, but I didn't see who. It was like a whisper in my head. I picked what I thought was right, but the leaves were soft, too soft, and she broke off, tears spilling down her cheeks. Miss Marple turned to the group, her gaze settling on Dr. Henshaw, whose face had paled. "Dr. Henshaw," she said, her voice steady, "you were in the garden that morning, studying your clematis. You know the plants better than anyone here. Could you have, in passing, pointed Lily to the sage, perhaps not noticing the foxglove beside it?" Henshaw's eyes widened, and he took a step back, his hands raised. "Me? I never spoke to her. I was by the greenhouse, yards away. I saw her with her basket, yes, but I didn't interfere. I'd never be so careless. My work depends on precision." His voice rose, a note of panic creeping in, and Miss Marple noted the way his fingers twitched, as if reaching for his absent notebook. Sir Henry stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "No one's accusing you, Doctor, but we must be thorough. Lily's memory is vague, but your presence in the garden places you near the scene. If you spoke to her, even casually, it could explain her error." Henshaw's face flushed, and he shook his head vigorously. I tell you, I didn't. I was focused on my work, a rare hybrid, delicate, not some kitchen herb. If Lily mistook foxglove for sage, it's her own doing, not mine. Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, her gaze thoughtful. Mistakes, Dr. Henshaw, are often shared. In St. Mary Mead, I once saw a farmer misdirect a boy to a field, thinking it was safe, only to find it flooded. No malice, just a moment's inattention. Lily's burden is heavy, but it's not hers alone. We must look to the garden and to those who shaped her choice. The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over the group. George Pritchard's eyes were on Lily, his expression a mix of pity and fear. Mrs. Bantry's fan lay still, her lips parted as if to speak, but holding back. Mrs. Eccles, her arm around Lily, glared at Henshaw, her loyalty fierce. Inspector Hargreaves, standing by the door, scribbled in his notebook, his eyes narrowing as he watched the scene. Miss Marple turned to Sir Henry, her voice low. The trap, Henry, has done its work. Not in the leaves, but in the looks. Dr. Henshaw's panic, Lily's tears, George's silence, they tell us more than words. We are close, I think, to the heart of it. The clock struck 9, its chimes, echoing through the hushed room. Miss Marple gathered her knitting, her mind clear. The trap had been set, and the truth, like a startled bird, was beginning to take flight. With her gentle patience and sharper mind, she was ready to follow its path through the tragedy of Rosewood Hall. Chapter 11. The botanist's oversight. The night air in Rosewood Hall carried a chill, as if the house itself mourned the tragedy that had unfolded within its walls. The dining room, where Miss Jane Marple's carefully orchestrated test had just concluded, was now empty, its chandelier dimmed, the sage infusion left cooling in its porcelain teapot. The guests had dispersed. George Pritchard to his room, Mrs. Arthur Bantry to the drawing-room, and Dr. Lloyd Henshaw to the terrace, his steps hasty as if fleeing scrutiny. Lily, supported by her aunt Mrs. Eccles, had retreated to the kitchen, her tears a silent testament to her burden. Miss Marple, her lavender shawl draped over her shoulders, lingered in the hallway with Sir Henry Clithering, her knitting bag at her side, her mind alight with the revelations of the evening. Sir Henry, his silver hair glinting in the lamplight, closed his notebook with a sigh. Jane, he said, his voice low, your trap was a masterstroke. Lily's hesitation, Henshaw's panic, they've given us more than hours of questioning. But where does it lead? You hinted at Henshaw's involvement, not as a murderer, but as a catalyst. Care to elaborate? Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her eyes bright behind her spectacles. It's a pattern, Henry, like a quilt coming together stitch by stitch. Lily's error was the thread, but the needle was another's hand. Dr. Henshaw, with his knowledge and his presence in the garden, is the key. Not through malice, I think, but through a moment's carelessness. Let's speak with him, alone, and see what his heart reveals. Sir Henry nodded, his expression grim but resolute. He led the way to the terrace, where Dr. Henshaw stood by a stone balustrade, his tweed jacket unbuttoned, his gaze fixed on the darkened garden. The lantern by the herb patch cast a faint glow, illuminating the sage and foxglove in a ghostly dance. Henshaw started at their approach, his hands fumbling for his spectacles. A nervous gesture Miss Marple had come to recognize. Dr. Henshaw, Sir Henry began, his tone firm but not unkind. We need a word. Your reaction tonight, when Miss Marple suggested you might have guided Lily, was telling. You've maintained you were nowhere near her in the garden, but we need the truth. Every detail matters. Henshaw's face flushed, and he gripped the balustrade, his knuckles whitening. I've told you everything, Sir Henry. I was by the greenhouse, studying a clematis, yards away from the herb patch. I saw Lily, yes, but I didn't speak to her, didn't point her to any plants. To suggest I'd be so reckless, it's an insult to my profession. His voice rose, a mix of indignation and fear, and Miss Marple noted the way his eyes darted to the garden, as if seeking escape. Miss Marple stepped forward, her voice gentle but piercing, like a breeze through an open window. No one questions your expertise, Dr. Henshaw. Indeed, it's your knowledge that makes this moment so curious. In St. Mary Mead, I once knew a gardener who misnamed a rose in passing, thinking it harmless, only to send a child picking the wrong blooms. You were in the garden, distracted by your clematis. But could you have spoken to Lily, casually perhaps, not realizing the weight of your words? Henshaw's jaw tightened, and he shook his head vigorously. I didn't, Miss Marple. I swear it. My work is solitary. Don't chatter with kitchen maids. I was focused on a rare hybrid, a Clematis vitacella, delicate and complex. I barely noticed Lily until she was back at the kitchen door, basket in hand. Miss Marple's needles paused, and she tilted her head, her eyes searching his face. A rare hybrid, you say? How fascinating. And yet, the herb patch was on your path, wasn't it? You passed it, saw Lily, perhaps heard her muttering about sage. A word from you, even a gesture, could have shaped her choice, not with intent, but with the carelessness of a mind elsewhere. Henshaw's face paled, and he took a step back, his hands trembling. You're twisting my words, Miss Marple. I couldn't have done such a thing. I know foxglove, know its dangers. I'd never mistake it for sage, or let anyone else do so under my nose. His voice cracked, and he looked away, his gaze fixed on the herb patch, where the foxglove's purple bells swayed in the night breeze. Sir Henry folded his arms, his voice steady. Let's try another angle, Doctor. You diagnosed Sylvia's poisoning at once digitalis, you said, with certainty. That's remarkable, given the chaos of the moment. Did you suspect the roast, even then? Or was it a guess based on your knowledge of the garden? Henshaw swallowed, his fingers adjusting his spectacles. It was no guess, Sir Henry. Her symptoms not. Irregular pulse, dilated pupils, were textbook digitalis, poisoning. I've studied toxicology, written papers on it. When I saw the herb patch later, with foxgloves so near the sage, it clicked. The roast was the only dish Sylvia ate heartily, and the herbs were the obvious source. But I had no part in it, I swear. Miss Marple's gaze softened, but her mind was sharp, piecing together the fragments of the case. You're a man of precision, Dr. Henshaw, and yet precision can falter under pressure. Let me paint a picture. Friday morning, you're in the garden, absorbed in your clematis. Lily, flustered and eager, is at the herb patch, muttering about sage. You pass by, perhaps to fetch a tool, and she looks to you, a scholar, an authority. Is this sage? She asks. Or perhaps you assume she's confused, and you point, meaning to help, to the patch where sage and foxglove grow side by side. A moment's distraction, and the wrong leaves are in her basket. Henshaw's eyes widened, and his breath caught, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. No, he whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. He sank onto a stone bench, his hands covering his face. No, it can't be. I didn't. I wouldn't. His words trailed off, and a heavy silence fell. broken only by the distant hoot of an owl. Miss Marple stepped closer, her voice gentle but unrelenting. In St. Mary Mead, Dr. I once saw a teacher misdirect a pupil with a single word, thinking it harmless, only to spark a chain of errors. You meant no harm, I believe that. But Lily trusted you, as young girls trust those who seem to know. Tell us what happened, and let the truth lighten your burden. Henshaw lifted his head, his face ashen, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. It was a moment, he said, his voice barely audible. I was by the greenhouse, yes, but I crossed the path to the herb patch to check a mint plant nearby. Lily was there, basket in hand, looking lost. She didn't ask me anything, but I saw her hesitating, reaching for the sage. I said, God help said, that's the sage, girl, pointing to the patch. I meant the sage, I swear, but the foxglove was right beside it, and I was thinking of my clematis, not her task. I walked away, didn't look back. I didn't. No, didn't think. He broke off, his shoulders shaking, his voice choked with horror. Sir Henry's face softened, but his tone remained firm. You pointed, and Lily followed, and the leaves she picked killed Sylvia. Why didn't you say this before, man? You could have spared us days of suspicion. Henshaw's hands dropped, and he looked up, his eyes haunted. I didn't realize, not at first. When Sylvia collapsed, I thought of digitalis, but not my part in it. It was only later, when the herb patch was mentioned, that I wondered. But I couldn't believe it. I'm a scientist. Sir Henry Precision is my life. To think I'd caused such a thing, it was unthinkable. I kept silent, hoping it wasn't true, praying Lily had made the mistake on her own. Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, her gaze thoughtful. Silence is a heavy burden, Dr. Henshaw, heavier than truth. Lily's error was yours, but not yours alone. Sylvia's death was a chain of moments, your distraction, Lily's haste, the garden's cruel design. But there was no malice, I think, only human frailty. Sir Henry rubbed his temples, his voice low. This changes everything, Jane. No murder, just a tragic accident. But we must confirm it with Lily, and the inspector will need a full statement. Henshaw, you'll need to come clean, no more hiding. Henshaw nodded, his face crumpling. I will, Sir Henry. I'll tell Hargreaves everything. I never meant harm, never. Sylvia was. She was kind to me, asked about my plants, listened when others didn't. To think I caused her death. He buried his face in his hands, his sobs quiet but wrenching. Miss Marple turned to Sir Henry, her voice soft. Let him be, Henry, for now. He's carried this longer than we knew. Lily must hear it, too, to lift her guilt, and George's grief will ease, knowing there was no intent. The garden has spoken, and its truth is sorrow, not sin. They left Henshaw on the terrace, his figure slumped against the balustrade, and returned to the drawing-room, where Inspector Hargreaves awaited. Sir Henry recounted the conversation, and Hargreaves, his dour face softening, agreed to take Henshaw's statement in the morning. A sad business, he said, closing his notebook. No crime, just carelessness. The coroner will call it misadventure, I expect. Miss Marple settled into a chair, her knitting bag at her side, her mind sifting through the case's final pieces. George Pritchard's debts, Mrs. Bantry's sharp observations, Lily's idolization of Silvio, they had all pointed to darker motives, but the truth was simpler and sadder. In St. Mary Mead, she had once seen a baker's apprentice spill flour across a shop, thinking it sugar, only to ruin a day's work. Here, the stakes were higher, but the error was no less human. Sir Henry joined her, his expression weary but relieved. You saw it, Jane, when I was chasing shadows. How did you? No, it was Henshaw, and not Pritchard or some darker plot. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her eyes twinkling. I didn't know, Henry, not at first. But people are like gardens, their patterns reveal them. Lily's fear was too raw for deceit, George's grief too deep for guile. Henshaw, though his panic, his silences, they spoke of a man hiding from himself. The garden told the rest, with its foxglove and sage, so close, so cruelly alike. The clock struck 10, its chimes a solemn note in the quiet house. Miss Marple gathered her knitting, her mind clear. The botanist's oversight had unravelled the mystery, revealing not a crime, but a chain of human errors, each small but deadly. With her gentle patience and sharper mind, she had followed the truth to its heart, ready now to let Rosewood Hall find peace. Chapter 12. The gardens lessened the morning of Monday, August 27th, dawned clear over Rosewood Hall, the sun casting a gentle light across the gardens where tragedy had so recently struck. The mist that had clung to the estate was gone, replaced by a crisp clarity that seemed to mirror the resolution of Sylvia Carslake's death. Miss Jane Marple, her lavender shawl pinned neatly at her shoulders, stood on the terrace, her eyes tracing the herb patch where foxglove and sage had woven their fatal confusion. The house behind her was stirring, its guests preparing to depart, their bags packed under the watchful eye of Inspector Hargreaves, who had concluded his inquiries. The coroner's verdict, to be formalized later, would call Sylvia's death a misadventure, a chain of errors rather than a crime. But the weight of that truth lingered in the air like the scent of damp earth. Miss Marple's knitting bag hung from her arm, its contents untouched as she reflected on the events of the past days. Dr. Lloyd Henshaw's confession, drawn out by her careful test the previous evening, had unravelled the mystery. A moment of carelessness, a casual gesture toward the herb patch, had led Lily to pick foxglove instead of sage, with deadly consequences. The revelation had lifted the shadow of murder, but it left a quieter sorrow, a reminder of how fragile human judgment could be. Sir Henry Clethering, her old friend and host, had invited her to join him for a final conversation in the library before her return to St. Mary Mead, and she made her way there now, her steps light but her mind heavy with the lessons of the weekend. The library, with its towering shelves and the faint aroma of leather and ink, was a haven of order amidst the chaos of the case. Sir Henry stood by the window, his silver hair catching the morning light, his face a mix of relief and weariness. The fire in the grate crackled softly, its warmth a contrast to the cool air outside. He turned as Miss Marple entered, his smile warm but tinged with admiration. "Jane," he said, gesturing to a chair, "you've done it again. You saw what I missed, what Hargreaves missed, and turned a tangle of suspicion into truth. I owe you a debt, as does Rosewood Hall." Miss Marple settled into the chair, her knitting bag at her side, her expression serene but her eyes sharp. "You're too kind, Henry," she said, her needles beginning their familiar rhythm. "I saw no more than was there, only perhaps in a different light. People are like gardens, you know, full of patterns, if one knows where to look. Sylvia's death was a sad bloom, but its roots were human, not wicked." Sir Henry sank into a chair opposite, his notebook closed on the table, its pages filled with the case's twists and turns. "Human, indeed," he said, and confession was a shock. though you saw it coming. A scientist, so precise, undone by a moment's distraction. And Lily, poor girl, carrying that guilt for something she couldn't have known. How did you piece it together, Jane? What tipped the scale? Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her gaze drifting to the window, where the garden lay in quiet splendor. It was Lily's fear, Henry, that first caught my eye. Not the fear of a guilty heart, but of a child who'd stumbled into a storm. Her tears, her trembling hands, they spoke of innocence, but also of a moment she couldn't quite recall. In St. Mary Mead, I once knew a girl who broke a vase and hid the pieces, not because she meant harm, but because she feared blame. Lily was hiding, but not from guilt, from confusion. She paused, her eyes narrowing as she sifted through the memories of the case. Then there was Dr. Henshaw, so sure of his knowledge, yet so quick to deflect. His panic when I suggested he'd guided Liliet was the crack in his armor. A man of his learning doesn't falter unless he's touched a truth he dreads. The garden itself told the rest. Foxglove and sage, so close, so alike, a trap for the unwary. Henshaw's gesture, meant to help, was the spark, and Lily's haste, the flame. Sir Henry leaned forward, his hands clasped, his voice low. And the others, George Pritchard, Mrs. Bantry, they seemed ripe for motive, didn't they? His debts, her disdain, even Lily's idolization of Sylviette, all pointed to something darker. Miss Marple nodded, her needles pausing as she met his gaze. They did, Henry, and that's the trick of human nature. Motives are like weeds, they grow everywhere, but not all bear fruit. George's grief was real, his debts a burden, but not a blade. Mrs. Bantry's sharp tongue cut deep, but her heart was elsewhere. In a world of tradition, Sylvia challenged. Lily's admiration was a mirror, reflecting her dreams, not her malice. They all played their parts, but the play was simpler than we thought, a tragedy of errors, not intent. Sir Henry rubbed his temples, a faint smile breaking through his weariness. You make it sound almost inevitable, Jane, but without you, we'd have chased those motives into a maze. Hargreaves was ready to arrest Pritchard, you know, until your test last night. How did you know it would work, putting Lily back in the garden with Henshaw watching? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, and she resumed her knitting, the soft click a counterpoint to her words. I didn't know, Henry, not entirely. But people reveal themselves under pressure, like flowers opening to the sun. Lily's task was a mirror, reflecting not just her actions, but the reactions of those around her. Henshaw's panic, George's silence, Mrs. Bantry's quick defense, they were signposts, pointing to the truth. In St. Mary Mead, I once set a trap for a thief by leaving a purse on a bench, not to catch him, but to see who looked guilty. Here, the herb patch was my bench, and Henshaw's face the confession. Sir Henry chuckled, shaking his head. You're a marvel, Jane. Scotland Yard could use you, though I suspect you'd find our methods too blunt. What happens now, do you think? Henshaw's statement is with Hargreaves, and Lily's been cleared of blame. Will they find peace, these people? Miss Marple's gaze softened, her needle slowing. Peace is a slow bloom, Henry, but it comes. Lily will carry her sorrow, but her aunt's love will mend her. George will mourn Sylvia, but time will dull the edge, and his debts will find a way to resolution. Mrs. Bantry will return to her. County circles, her tongue as sharp as ever, but perhaps a touch kinder. As for Dr. Henshaw, his burden is heaviest he'll bear the weight of his oversight. But his honesty last night was a step toward redemption. The garden has taught them all a lesson, I think, about care and consequence. Sir Henry rose, crossing to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. And you, Jane, back to St. Mary Mead, to your roses and your knitting? Or will you linger, in case another puzzle arises? Miss Marple smiled, folding her knitting and tucking it into her bag. St. Mary Mead calls Henry, with its quiet days and noisy gossip. But puzzles are everywhere, aren't they? In gardens, in hearts, in the smallest glance. I'll tend my roses and keep my eyes open, as always. They parted, Sir Henry to see to the guests' departures, Miss Marple to her room to pack her modest suitcase. As she folded her shawl, her thoughts returned to the garden, its herb patch, now a silent witness to the truth. She recalled her own garden in St. Mary Mead, where foxglove bloomed each summer, its purple spires a warning to the unwary. She had always pruned it with care, knowing its beauty hid a deadly heart. Here, at Rosewood Hall, the lesson was the same. Beauty and danger often grew side by side, and only vigilance could tell them apart. By midday, the guests were gone. George Pritchard left in a hired car, his face pale but his shoulders straighter, as if the truth had lifted a weight. Mrs. Bantry, her burgundy shawl trailing, climbed into her chauffeur-driven Bentley. Her parting words to Sir Henry a mix of gratitude and admonition to keep that garden in check. Dr. Henshaw, his tweed jacket rumpled, walked to the village station, his head bowed, his notebook clutched like a talisman. Lily and Mrs. Eccles remained, their bonds strengthened by shared sorrow, their kitchen once again a place of honest work. Miss Marple, her suitcase in hand, stood on the gravel drive, waiting for the taxi that would take her to the train. Sir Henry joined her, his expression warm. "You've left Rosewood better than you found it, Jane," he said. "I'll not forget this weekend, nor your gift for seeing the world's patterns." She smiled, her eyes twinkling. "The world is full of patterns, Henry, if one knows where to look. A garden, a village, a heart, they all tell stories if we listen. Keep your own garden well, and write to me in St. Mary Mead." The taxi arrived, its engine a soft rumble in the quiet air. Miss Marple climbed in, her knitting bag at her side, and waved as the car pulled away. As Rosewood Hall receded, she thought of Sylvia Carslake, her laughter silenced but her memory a reminder of life's fragility. The garden's lesson was clear. Carelessness could kill, but truth could heal, and Miss Marple, with her gentle patience and sharper mind, carried that lesson home. Back in St. Mary Mead, she resumed her routine, her cottage a haven of chintz and roses. The village buzzed with its usual gossip. Mrs. Price's new hat, the vicar's sermon, a dispute over a lost hen butt. Miss Marple's thoughts lingered on Rosewood. She tended her garden with care, pruning the foxglove with a steady hand, its purple bells a silent echo of the tragedy she'd unravelled. Each snip of her shears was a reminder. Beauty demanded vigilance, and truth, like a well-tended plant, thrived only with patience. The days passed, and a letter arrived from Sir Henry, brief but warm, reporting that Rosewood Hall was quiet, its herb patch replanted with sage alone, the foxglove banished to a distant border. Lily, he wrote, was learning to read, her aunt's gift to keep her mind from wandering. Dr. Henshaw had taken a post abroad, seeking solace in new soil. George Pritchard had paid his debts, a small legacy from Sylvia's aunt easing his path. Mrs. Bantry, true to form, was organising a county fete, her energy undimmed. Miss Marple folded the letter, her smile faint but content. The garden's lesson had taken root, not just at Rosewood but in her own heart. She returned to her knitting, her needles clicking softly, her eyes on the roses beyond her window. The world, she knew, would always have its puzzles, its foxgloves, hidden among the sage, but with her quiet step and sharper mind, she was ready for them as ever.